Florence, in the heart of the 13th century, was a city that burned not only with the fervor of trade and politics, but also with the crudest human tensions. The streets were full of life, but also with intrigues, passions and clashes that often led to inevitable tragedies. In this convulsive scenario, Dante Alighieri was born, a man whose destiny was marked by the internal and external storms of his time. Florence was not just his home, it was a battlefield of ideas, powers, and emotions that shaped each fiber of their being. The city was a mosaic of sounds, the echo of the bells calling mass, the passionate discussions in the squares, the crunch of the wonders on the stones of the streets. But also, there was a deeper echo, the whisper of political tensions between Guelfos and Ghibellinos, a struggle that seemed to have no end. Dante, a sensitive and observant child, absorbed everything, from the debates on adults to the silent sighs of a divided flourish. Religion was the pillar of society, but also a political weapon. The church, with its omnipresent power, dictated the norms of good and evil. However, Dante saw beyond appearances. He observed how religious and political leaders often used faith as a tool for their own ambitions, and how human suffering was caught in that cruel game. He was a young man who could not close his eyes to the contradictions of his world. It was in this context where Dante began to build his vision of the universe. Not as an escape, but as an answer, like a heartbreaking cry against the injustices he saw around him. As he grew up, his readings of classic and religious texts lit a spark in him. Virgil, Homer, and the Bible were intertwined in their mind, creating a unique landscape where the human and the divine collided strongly. His studies were not simply academic, they were a desperate search for meaning in the midst of chaos. Florence gave him a lot, but he also snatched more than he can imagine. Love, politics, and betrayal were intertwined in their life as threads of a torn tapestry. Beatrice, the woman who marked her soul, became the symbol of unattainable purity, a light in a gloomy world. But the same city that gave him that love also condemned him to exile, a wound that would never heal completely. Being separated from his home, from his people, was like being thrown into the void, an abyss that would resonate in every word he would write later. Dante's exile was not only physical, but also spiritual. Winging city in city, he faced a vacuum that he could only fill with his art. He was a broken man, but his pain was an inexhaustible source of creativity. The scars of his life became the furrows where he would plant the seeds of his largest work. In his lonely nights, while humanity slept, he forged a world where every tear, every betrayal, every sin had a place, a purpose. Dante did not write with the intention of comforting. His words were like fire, destined to burn lies and reveal the deepest truths. His vision of hell was not just a divine punishment, it was a brutal mirror where the faces of those who had betrayed him were reflected, those who had betrayed humanity itself. Each circle, each torment, carried the mark of a wound that he had suffered or witnessed. The man who once walked through the streets of Florence, with his eyes full of dreams and the heart loaded with questions, became a poet whose words would resonate throughout the centuries. Dante not only created a vision of hell, it shapes the pain of an era, to the unbearable weight of human being in a world that seemed designed to break us. But his work, born of suffering and injustice, does not end in the abyss. There is something else, an echo that extends beyond the shadows. A man lost in a dark jungle, caught between terror and despair, is face to face with his deepest fears. This is the beginning of the Divine Comedy, not only a poem, but a storm made words. Each verse carries the weight of a humanity that struggles to understand its purpose, its guilt and redemption. Dante Alighieri not only wrote a book, he left a scar in history, one that continues to ferment on centuries later. The structure of this work is a perfect cosmos, divided into three kingdoms that reflect the complexity of the human soul: hell, purgatory, and paradise. Each of them has a clear purpose, a path that goes from the darkest of the human condition to the light of the divine. But it is not just a ladder towards salvation, it is a brutal confrontation with our own elections, our own demons. Hell is a place where the screams never cease, where each circle reveals a bitter truth about sin and its cost. There is no redemption here, only eternal punishment, and Dante forces us to look, without blinking, the consequences of our actions. Purgatory, in contrast, is a space of hope, where souls carry their sins as a cross, but with the promise of freeing themselves. And paradise? Paradise is not simply the happy ending we could expect. It is a place that defies our understanding, a pure light sphere that demands a complete transformation of the spirit to be understood. But the Divine Comedy does not stop in its structure. It is a mirror, one that reflects the society of Dante and ours. Each character that the poet finds, from those condemned in hell to the blessed in paradise, has a story that speaks of political tensions, moral dilemmas, and human contradictions of his time. Dante is not afraid to point out with his finger, kings, potatoes, friends, and enemies appear under his implacable gaze. No one is untouchable. The purpose of this work is not simply to tell a story. It is a warning, a lament, a hope. Dante takes us by the hand, but not to comfort us. It drags us along a path full of pain and beauty, showing us what we are and what we could be. It invites us to face our shadows, not with resignation, but with the will to transform them into something bigger. Culturally, the Divine Comedy is an explosion that has not stopped resonating. It has influenced literature, philosophy, art, and music, from its creation to the present day. Dante's verses are like a river that never stops flowing, carrying with them the memory of an era and the universal questions that we all continue to do. What does it mean to be human? What is justice? Is forgiveness possible? And yet, while his words transport us to landscapes of fire, purifying mountains, and starry skies, there is something deeply human in all this. Because, in the end, this is not just Dante's trip. It is ours. A trip that, between circles of suffering and spirals of glory, never seems to have a clear ending. But something awaits us beyond the last page. The door opens and a heavy air, loaded with regrets and despair, invades the senses. On the threshold, a warning carved with fire: abandon all hope, those who enter. It is more than a phrase, it is a blow to the soul, a sentence that defines the heart of what hell represents. Dante does not describe a simple place of punishment. Every corner, every torment, every whisper in the dark is impregnated with a symbolism that goes beyond physical pain. Here, hell is a heartbreaking reflection of human elections, the shadows that we carry in the soul and the consequences of facing divine justice. Sin is not an accident in Dante's universe. It is an election, an indelible brand in the essence of those who commit it. In hell, sin not only defines the destiny of the soul, but is also the architect of its torment. Each circle is an allegory, a cruel truth that unfolds with implacable precision. The lustful, thrown into an eternal whirlwind, are trapped in the same unbridled desire that consumed them in life. Greed and prodigos push gigantic pesos, a burden that symbolizes their obsession with the material. There are no arbitrary punishments, everything is a perfect echo of the lives they carried. Sin is its prison and its executioner. But hell not only speaks of the convicted. It also shouts the words of divine justice, a concept that burns in each circle. This justice is not what we know on earth, subject to errors and manipulations. It is an absolute justice, a balance that cannot be leaning a millimeter beyond the deserved. And yet, this same justice raises terrifying questions. Is an eternity of suffering for a finite sin really fair? Dante does not respond. Let each reader feel the weight of that question while walking between the flames and the screams. Through this gloomy landscape, there is also a faint, almost invisible thread of redemption. But it is not an easy redemption. Dante's hell does not offer roads to escape. Instead, redemption appears as a contrast, as the absence of what is suffered here. Each condemned soul reminds us that there was a time when a different destination could have been chosen, that there was an opportunity to change, but was rejected. It is a cruel but necessary reminder that the elections matter, that free will is both a gift and a load. The symbolism of hell also touches something deeper, the internal struggle of each human being. Who has not ever felt that his own mistakes drag him towards an abyss? Dante not only describes a place, frown us tar to our own weaknesses, to our own fears. It forces us to look at what we hide under the surface, to listen to the echoes of our own faults echoing in the dark. It is a brutal confrontation, but also an invitation to change before it is too late. And while we advance between circles and torments, we cannot avoid feeling that hell is more than a place. It is a state of the soul, a condition that, perhaps, some of us already carry inside. The chains are not visible, but they feel. The fire does not rise in the skin, but burns. And the voices of the convicted are too familiar. However, hell is not the end. It cannot be. Something else expects, beyond the last icy circle, beyond the abyss where Lucifer twists in his own defeat. Something that, like a distant whisper, promises that suffering is not the last word. The underworld has been, since the dawn of humanity, a territory veiled by shadows and mysteries. In each culture, in every corner of the world, the fate of the dead has been woven with threads of fear, hope, and questions that challenge all logic. Before Dante embodied his vision of hell, there were already stories that talked about underground kingdoms where souls faced their destiny, stories that shaped the way we imagined what is beyond the last breath. In ancient Greece, Hades was not only the god, but also the name of the place he ruled. There were no eternal flames or indiscriminate punishments, but a gloomy kingdom where the dead inhabited as shadows of what they once were. There, the Estigia River marked the threshold between the living and the dead, and Charon, the boatman, demanded his payment to transport souls to the other side. But not all the dead shared the same destination. Virtuous souls could find rest in the Elysian fields, a serene paradise, while the wicked were sent to Tartar, an abyss of torment. The Tartar was the exception in an underworld who, otherwise, was monotonous and grey. However, its existence marked a key idea that would resonate centuries later: punishment as a result of sin. The stories of Sisyphus, condemned to pushing an upstairs mountain, and Tantalus, tormented by thirst and hunger, show us the root of a concept that Dante would lead to its maximum expression. In these stories there was a cruel, almost poetic logic. Punishments reflected the failures of those who suffered them. More east, in the lands of Mesopotamia, the underworld was an even more bleak place. The Ereshkigal, queen of the underworld, reigned on a domain where the dead lived in the dark, feeding on dust and mud. Inanna's myth, the goddess who descended to the underworld to face her sister, talks about a trip that was not only physical, but also spiritual. The decline to the underworld was seen as a test, a confrontation with the darkest and essential one of oneself. In the story, Inanna is stripped of everything in each of the doors she is going through: her crown, her jewels, her clothes. When he is finally naked before Ereshkigal, he is completely vulnerable, with nothing that defines it except its own essence. This myth, loaded with symbolism, anticipates the idea that the underworld is not only a place of punishment, but a space for transformation, an idea that will resonate in the circles of Dantesque hell. Meanwhile, medieval Christianity began to draw its own vision of the beyond. Influenced by biblical, apocryphal, and popular traditions, Christian hell took shape as a place of eternal torment, governed not by a god, but by the fallen angel, Lucifer. The images were increasingly vivid: flames that never went out, endless shouts, bodies that suffered without hope of rest. But medieval hell was not just a place of punishment, it was also a reminder. In each sermon, in each illustration of the churches, hell was a warning of the consequences of sin. The stories multiplied. There were stories of saints who had had visions of hell, of sinners who had been dragged by demons, of souls that supplied by divine intercession. These narratives were not only to scare, but to teach. They showed hell that was not random, but reflected the justice of God. Each torment, every fire, every tear had a purpose: to return the divine order to a universe disturbed by sin. Dante took these roots and made them his, shaping them in something completely new. But before his pen, there were echoes of these myths in every corner of humanity. And although the poet brought us hand in hand through a structured and detailed hell, the shadows of these ancient stories were still present at each step, as if they were the whispers of the dead who never stopped to undermine. And beyond, even in the depths, something else expects, something that connects all these stories in a common abyss. In the depths of the Divine Comedy, Dante's hell is not only a place of torment, it is a carefully built work on theological and philosophical foundations that give it coherence and purpose. Each circle, every punishment, each soul shouts truths that are born of centuries of religious and philosophical reflection. To understand this place, you have to listen to the voices of those who, long before Dante, tried to understand the mystery of sin, justice, and salvation. San Augustine de Hipona was one of those voices that deeply resonated in the Dantesque vision. For Augustine, sin was not simply an act, it was a break with God, a deviation of the divine path that led to chaos and condemnation. In his writings, especially in The City of God, he described hell not only as a physical place, but as a condition of the soul, a total and eternal separation of divine grace. This idea permeates every corner of Dantesque hell. Sinners not only suffer physical punishments, but also face the torment of knowing themselves forever from God. Augustine also saw sin as a matter of order and hierarchy. For him, divine justice was a reflection of the perfect balance of the universe, where everything should take its place according to God's will. When sinners chose to deviate from that order, they were challenging the harmony of the cosmos. Dante took this idea and translated it into its structure of hell, where each circle reflects a specific transgression against that divine order. There are no chaos here. Even in horror, there is an unwavering logic. Tomás de Aquino, another of the great theological pillars that influenced Dante, contributed systematic clarity to Christian thought that is reflected in the almost mathematical organization of hell. In his monumental work, Theological Sum, Tomás explored the nature of sin, justice, and grace with a precision that left an indelible mark on Dante's thought. For Thomas, sin was a lack of reason, a deliberate choice to depart from the supreme good, which is God. This rationalist vision of sin translates into the meticulous categorization of infernal circles in the Divine Comedy. Each soul is exactly where it belongs, facing a punishment that is not arbitrary, but perfectly proportional to its sin. Tomás also insisted that divine justice was not cruel, but absolutely fair. Although punishment may seem severe from the human perspective, in the divine plan it is simply the restoration of balance. This idea is central in Dante's vision. The punishments in hell are not simple acts of divine revenge, they are the logical and necessary result of the actions of sinners. Dante does not allow their readers to feel sorry for the convicted, rather, it forces us to accept that each of them is exactly where it should be. The Bible, of course, is the fundamental source of all Dante's theology. The Gospels, with their warnings about eternal fire and the separation of God, provided the initial images of hell. But there are also the echoes of the Apocalypse, with their language of terrifying punishment and unwavering divine justice. Genesis, with the fall of Adam and Eve, and the Exodus, with his idea of sin as slavery, also resonate in Dante's vision. The Bible is not just a source of inspiration, it is the framework that supports all the theological construction of his work. But Dante's hell is not limited to copying these sources, transforms them. Take the abstract reflections of Augustine, Tomás, and the scriptures and make them something visceral, tangible. Sin ceases to be an idea and becomes flesh. The punishments cease to be concepts and transform into shouts, in flames, in eternal suffering. Dante translates theology into a drama that is not only understood, but feels in each fiber of being. And while the poet guides the reader through this labyrinth of fire and ice, there is a persistent echo, a whisper that seems to come from the depths itself, that even in the darkest place, the divine order never stops reign. But what this order really means, that is only revealed later, in a place where light and shadows collide in unexpected ways. Darkness wraps everything. Dante is lost, not in a physical place, but in something deeper, more scary, a dark jungle that seems to breathe with its own evil rhythm. The trees rise as spectra, and the ground under their feet cuts, with a sound that does not belong to this world. There is no visible path, only chaos, shadows, and a feeling of suffocating insulation. Each step is a fight against disorientation and fear. Dante is caught not only in the thickness of this jungle, but in the confusion of its own soul. The jungle is not a simple scenario, it is a reflection of its spiritual state. He feels lost, sunk in an abyss where the light of reason and faith hardly shines. His mistakes, his fears, and hopelessness have taken him to this place where the leaves whisper approaches, and the air seems to be loaded with the questions he has avoided answering. The life he once knew is behind him, and the future is a nebula of uncertainty. In the midst of this anguish, an even greater danger appears. Three beasts arise from the shadows, an agile and mortal panther, a lion that roars with the strength of pride, and a wolf whose eyes reflect an insatiable hunger. They are not simple animals, they are living symbols of the obstacles that have led him to this state. The panther attracts it with the pleasures of the flesh, the lion intimidates him with his own arrogance, and the wolf, the most fearsome, consumes it with greed and despair. Dante tries to go back, but the road is blocked. There is no escape. And when it seems that everything is lost, a figure emerges from the shadows. A man, wrapped in an air of wisdom and dignity, presents himself, Virgil, the poet Dante admires deeply. Its presence is a ray of light in this oppressive darkness, a voice that calms the chaos that reigns in the mind of the protagonist. Virgil is not there by chance, he has been sent as a guide, as an answer to the prayers of someone who still believes in Dante's redemption. The conversation between the two is brief but loaded with meaning. Virgil speaks with a calm that contrasts with Dante's agitation. He explains that this path will not be easy, that he must cross places that will challenge his faith and resistance. But it also offers something that Dante has not felt in a long time: hope. Although the dark jungle seems to have no end, Virgil assures him that there is a purpose, a goal that justifies suffering. But before reaching the light, Dante must descend to the depths of his own fear and face what he has avoided for so long. The Latin poet becomes a mentor, but also in a mirror. His presence reminds Dante that he is not completely alone, that even in the deepest despair there are those who believe in their ability to change, to find the right path. Virgil is the reason, the intellectual guide that complements the spirit broken by Dante. Together, they start a trip that will not only be physical, but also deeply spiritual. The dark jungle is behind, but not quite. His shadow persists, as a reminder of how easy it is to get lost and how difficult it is to find the way back. Each step forward is loaded with uncertainty, but also of determination. Dante knows that what is coming will be terrifying, that he will face things that challenge not only his faith, but the very essence of his humanity. But with Virgil by his side, he dares to take the first step towards the abyss. What awaits you beyond the edge? You still can't imagine it. The air becomes heavier, loaded with a silence that is not simple absence of sound, but an oppressive presence that crushes the spirit. Before Dante and Virgil, an immense door rises, carved in stone, covered with cracks that look like veins of a dead heart. But they are not the dimensions of the door that freezes Dante instead. It is the inscription that the crown, those words that seem to burn even on the cold surface of the rock: abandon all hope, those who enter. The motto is not just a warning, it is a sentence, a conviction. These words have a weight that crosses the body and reaches the soul directly, stripping of any illusion, any trace of optimism. What really does this phrase mean? What implies abandoning all hope? Dante feels like a blow, a reality that forces him to face the magnitude of the place he is about to enter. This is not just a physical space, it is a domain where hope, the spark that keeps humanity alive even in the darkest moments, cannot exist. Hope is, for the living, a lighthouse. It is what guides the lost, which relieves suffering and gives meaning to the struggle. Leaving it is to give up everything that humanity defines, to any connection with the divine, with forgiveness, with redemption. In this place, there is no future, there is no possibility of change. There is only the eternal present of punishment, the perpetuity of a torment without exit. Virgil observes Dante carefully, aware of what these words can cause in the mood of his partner. There is no comfort on his face, because there can be no. The only thing you can offer is your guide, your company in this descent to the abyss. But even his presence cannot cancel the weight of those words. Dante feels the cold of truth. This is a place where even the same misericordia of God seems to have disappeared, where justice reigns without compassion, without mitigating. The motto not only establishes the tone of hell, defines it. Each circle, each torment, each condemned soul reflects the total absence of hope. The screams that resonate from the other side of the door are not only of physical pain, but of absolute despair, of a certainty that crosses each fiber of their being: there will never be an end, there will never be redemption. For those who cross this threshold, eternity becomes its prison. But there is something else, something that is not said, but it feels. The motto also speaks to the living. It is a warning for those who still have time, for those who can change their destiny. These words not only describe the state of the convicted, they are a mirror, a reflection of what can happen when one departs from the right path. In that sense, they are a desperate call, an echo that cries out that decisions that shape the soul are not taken lightly. While Dante takes the first step towards the door, he feels something changes inside him. each fiber of his being to fight against the idea of abandoning hope, because without it, what is left? But it has no choice. Virgilio avanza, and Dante follows it, even if his soul wobbles. As they cross the threshold, the motto is behind, recorded in its memory as an open wound. What awaits further is not a mystery, it is a certainty, a descent where every step will be deeper, darker, more inescapable. The echo of words seems to whisper even after crossing, abandoned all hope, and in the gloom that surrounds them, hell begins to reveal his face. The air seems to vibrate with an endless lament, a choir of souls that shout speechless, loaded with suffering and hopelessness. Before Dante and Virgil, the Aquaranti River extends, a murky and dark current that seems to absorb the light itself. Water does not flow like earthly rivers, his movement is heavy, slow, as if the weight of condemned souls dragged him towards the deepest abyss. This is not any river. It is the definitive limit, the barrier that separates the world from the living of the kingdom of the dead. In the distance, a figure appears that challenges all understanding. He is Charon, the underworld boat. Its presence is imposing, a mixture of the human and the supernatural. His face, aged and marked by millennia of suffering, reflects an inextinguishable fury. His eyes are embers that burn with an inhuman intensity, as if he carried in himself the fire of hell itself. He does not speak immediately, you don't need to do it. His gaze is enough to make souls tremble, aware that there is no return once they get on their boat. Dante observes silently, caught between fear and amazement. The souls waiting to cross the river are a terrifying show, they are shadows, empty and deformed, their faces still keeping traces of the lives they once had. They push each other, desperate to reach the boat, as if the torment of staying on this side of the river was even worse than what awaits them on the other side. The noise is deafening, cries, screams, supplications. But Charon is not moved. With an abrupt movement of your rowing, silence any attempt to resistance. When the boatman finally speaks, his voice is thunder that rumbles in Dante's ears. You, Alma alive, what are you doing here? Charon is not used to transporting the living. His boat is not intended for those who still breathe, and their presence alters the natural order of hell. Virgil intervenes, and although he does not raise his voice, his authority is unwavering. He explains that the divine will has decreed the passage of Dante, and Charon, although reluctant, has no choice but to obey. However, his gaze does not stop burning with a visceral hatred towards the intruder. The souls begin to climb to the boat, one after another, under the fierce look of Charon. There is no order, only chaos. Each soul seems to load its own weight, as if its sin made it heavier, more difficult to move. Dante observes how some barely manage to drag, while others throw themselves with a mixture of fear and resignation. No one fights. No one resists. Here, fate is already sealed. The boat is filled, and although it seems too small for so many souls, it does not sink. It is as if it were designed to withstand the weight of human suffering without ever breaking. Charon's rowing hits the water with force, and the boat begins to advance. As they move away from the shore, the noise of the souls who expect their turn fades, leaving only the sound of the water that is stirred under the rowing. Dante feels that something inside him breaks. This is not just a physical crossing, it is an irreversible step towards a reality that cannot fully understand. Each stroke seems to mark the beat of a heart that is not his, a rhythm that connects it with the pain of all the souls that surround it. He cannot avoid thinking about those who are in this boat, in the lives they carried, in the decisions that brought them here. And although he still does not know his stories, he feels a mixture of compassion and terror that paralyzes him. When they finally reach the other shore, darkness becomes deeper. Charon does not say one more word. With an abrupt movement, he points out that it is time to go down. Souls do it without resistance, crawling towards the entrance of hell proper. Dante, on the other hand, hesitated. His heart beats hard, as if he wanted to escape from his chest. But Virgil is by his side, and his presence, although he does not eliminate fear, gives him enough strength to take the next step. The Aquente River is behind, but its echo persists, as a reminder of what has just witnessed. In front, hell begins to display its horrors, and Dante knows that what he has seen so far is only the beginning. The first circle of hell is Limbo, a place that, although exempt from physical torments and visceral sufferings, feels like an eternal emptiness, where the soul is trapped between hope and despair. Dante and Virgil cross the entrance of this circle, and the first thing that attracts attention is stillness. There is no fire, nor shouts, nor heartbreaking cries. The air is fresh, and the light, although dim, is not the absolute darkness that predominates in the other circles. However, what should be a comfort becomes a torment in itself. There are no physical punishments here, but the conviction is more subtle, the absence of the presence of God, never having reached eternal salvation. This is the home of the virtuous pagans, those who lived lives of goodness and virtue, but who, when they died, never knew the grace of Christian baptism. They are found in limbo because, although they lived rightly, their final destiny escaped for a matter of time and context. They were born before the coming of Christ. They never had the opportunity to know the light of salvation. And so, they are condemned to an existence in which there is no punishment, but neither comfort. They are trapped souls in an endless weight, aware of their virtue, but deprived of salvation. Dante observes these souls and feels a mixture of respect and sadness. Go to famous characters of antiquity: Homer, Socrates, Aristotle, Plato, and many other great thinkers and poets of history. They are admirable beings, men who reached human greatness in their respective fields, but, ultimately, did not have the opportunity to redeem their soul due to the lack of knowledge of Christ. Dante looks at them with a sense of compassion, but also of discomfort. If they, the greatest among men, could not find salvation, who could? Among them, there are also children who die before being baptized, innocent souls condemned not for their own sins, but for the lack of a blessing that would have opened the doors of heaven. They are purely good beings, but they are still deprived of God's vision. This contrast between the purity of his soul and the conviction they face due to circumstances outside their control raises a crucial question: is it fair that those who lived according to virtue, which reached wisdom and nobility, are condemned to this eternal conviction just for not having been baptized? In limbo, souls live in a disturbing peace, a peace that is not true, because it lacks the ultimate source of peace, the union with God. Although they do not suffer physical torments, there is something deeply disturbing in this existence without hope. The reflection on divine justice becomes inevitable. If God is fair, why these virtuous beings, who did not know the light of Christianity, are excluded from salvation? Is salvation a punishment, a gift that is granted to those who are lucky to be born at the right time, in the right place? Virgil, who is among these limbo spirits, is an example of this paradoxical justice. Although the Roman poet lived according to principles of morality and wisdom, he could not access Christian salvation due to his time. Virgil is caught in this intermediate existence, between the glory of his knowledge and the void of salvation. Although Dante looks at him with admiration, he also feels the bitter awareness that, despite all his knowledge, Virgil will never know the face of God. What is at stake in limbo is not only the issue of salvation, but also the concept of divine justice. How can it be fair that those who lived lives of virtue and reasoning are condemned to this void? Dante does not give a clear answer to this question. Instead, let the atmosphere of limbo speak by itself, a place of peace that, at the same time, is an unbearable punishment for or own lack of purpose. Limbo souls are not punished by sin, but for an omission, for not having the opportunity to know the path that leads to true salvation. And, while souls are grouped in this first circle, they meet their fellow men, but they can never join God. They are, in a way, apart from the divine universe. Dante feels that something escapes, that this contradiction, this apparent injustice, continues to float in the dense air of this place. Although Virgil tries to comfort him with his wisdom, Dante cannot stop thinking about those who history, circumstances, and destiny have denied grace. The exclusion of the virtuous pagans and the unbaptized raises an issue that transcends religions and epochs. Is it really fair divine justice when it excludes those who, by the simple fact of not being born at the right time, are left out of the eternal salvation? While Dante and Virgil continue on their way, the answer is still suspended in the air, in the eternal stillness of a limbo where virtue is admired, but never rewarded with the light of the sky. The wind in the second circle of hell is violent, roaring, as if the same air was being whipped by the unbridled passions that dominate this place. Dante and Virgil advance, and the atmosphere changes. The heat intensifies, the air becomes dense, and the first thing that hits the senses is an incessant sound, a fierce wind that drags souls without rest. This is the punishment of the lustful ones, those who did not know how to dominate their wishes, those whose overflowing passions led them to perdition. Here, love is not a blessing, but a perpetual torment. Those convicted in the second circle are the souls of those who succumb to the sin of lust, who let their carnally insatiable wishes give their actions. In life, they were dragged by the fire of desire, and now, in hell, they are dragged by an unstoppable wind, a wind that does not allow it to calm down, that does not give rest. Souls are dragged without control, moved from one side to another by this invisible force, as if their bodies were puppets of passion. There is no direction, there is no comfort, just a constant struggle to find some peace that never comes. Among the shadows of these wandering souls, Dante stops to see two figures that stand out. They are Paolo and Francesca, two names that, in the Italian tradition, resonate strongly. Their bodies float, hugged, while the wind drags them. Dante recognizes them immediately, but at the same time, the scene moves it deeply. The two lovers seem to be the most vulnerable, the most fragile in this eternal punishment. His eyes are not empty of emotion, on the contrary, they seem to be full of deep sadness, a resignation that they have not yet been able to overcome. Francesca, the woman, is the first to speak. With a soft voice, but loaded with pain, he tells Dante the story of his forbidden love with Paolo, his brother-in-law. The passion that arose between them was not a mere passing adventure, but a burning fire that devoured everything in its path. In a moment of weakness, Francesca and Paolo gave to temptation, and that choice changed their destinations forever. The love that once united them, that unstoppable desire that led them to find themselves hidden, became the sin that condemned them to this eternal suffering. Both are aware that their love, so pure and deep for them in life, is now a prison, a torment that keeps them trapped in a cycle of endless suffering. While Francesca speaks, his words are an echo of despair, a lament that reflects the understanding of the irremediable. The passion they felt, the desire that consumed them was the spark that led them to death and conviction. In his story, Francesca and Paolo not only accept their punishment, but they live it, they feel it in every corner of their being. Lust not only stole their lives, but now it takes away the possibility of finding comfort, of finding rest. The wind continues to drag them, again and again, as an eternal reminder of their lack of self-control. Dante, looking at this scene, feels a mixture of compassion and horror. The tragedy of Paolo and Francesca is undeniable. They are two souls that, in their hearts, loved themselves sincerely, but were unable to control the strength of their love. In their passion, they crossed a line, and that transgression led them to this hell of endless torments. What makes them even more tragic is that, in their history, there is no evil, only an overflowing passion that consumed them without mercy. In his life, perhaps they could not see that his love, however legitimate they seemed to them, had dragged them into the abyss. Francesca, in her heartbreaking confession, explains how, at the time she and Paolo gave to temptation, they read a book together. The Libro, a love story, was the catalyst of his fall. The story I read aloud was like a drug that seduced them and led them to lose all right. At that time, they gave themselves without reservations to desire, and that act cost them life and eternity in hell. Remembering the book that led them to their downfall, Francesca and Paolo cannot avoid a sigh of sadness. It is as if the whole world had given them an opportunity to fall. The wind does not cease, and souls are still dragged without rest, but what remains in the air is a deep reflection on the nature of lust and its consequences. Lust is not just physical desire, it is the force that drags the will, which cancels reason, which erases the borders between good and evil. The lustful in hell are not necessarily bad people, but victims of an overflowing passion that took them beyond their limits. The true tragedy of Paolo and Francesca, like that of so many souls in the second circle, is not only his eternal conviction, but his inability to find a way of loving that he did not destroy everything that surrounded them. Dante, observing this scene, cannot avoid feeling that love, in its purest and passionate form, can be as devastating as any other sin. The wind continues to blow, but in the air there is the question of whether we can ever control the passion without consuming us, if it is possible to find the balance between desire and reason, without losing what we love most in the process. The air becomes thick, oppressive, as if the weight of indulgence had accumulated and now had a physical form. Dante and Virgil are going through the dark and enter the third circle of hell, a place where perdition does not occur in flames or in devastating winds, but in the icy stillness of constant rain. There is no fire here or heat, but an icy rain that falls with a relentless force, covering everything that touches with an ice layer. Drops are not like earthly rain, each seems loaded with deep suffering, as if the same nature had become cruel and vindictive, reminding the convicted of the sin they committed. The rain becomes a perfect metaphor of sin that defines this circle: gluttony, the insatiable excess of material pleasures, the hunger that is never satisfied, the desire that never finds a limit. The souls Dante observes are trapped in immense suffering, but their torment is rather physical than emotional. Glotones, convicted of their insatiable appetite during their lives, are mired in this cold storm. The ice that covers their bodies is like a prison that keeps them motionless, unable to move, while the ice water continues to fall on them, perpetual punishment for not having modeled. Among these souls, Dante sees known figures, but the suffering that their faces reflect is so deep that they do not seem human beings, but distorted shadows, as if their own excess of life had taken humanity. Among them, two figures that attract attention stand out: Cerbero, the three-headed monster that stands on the Glottons, while tearing with their fangs to those who tried to get up from the ice. Cerbero is a representation of gluttony itself, an insatiable monster that represents the excess and violence of desire without control. Its presence is the conviction made, a reminder of what it means to get lost in excess. Dante, when observing this landscape, cannot avoid the feeling of repulsion, but at the same time, there is something deeply human in it. What makes a human being reach this point? What leads someone to live with such excess, to surrender without break to the needs of the body without thinking about the consequences? Here, in the third circle, the gluttony is not only a sin of hunger, but also a sin of lack of control, of not being able to say it enough, of not recognizing the limit, of continuing to feed a void that is never filled. Souls, trapped in this torment, do not communicate with each other. There is no comfort, there are no conversations about their past lives or regrets. The frozen rain has made them mute, as if the cold had installed in their hearts, disconnecting them from the world of the living. The scene is bleak. Dante observes how some of those convicted try to get up from the ice, only to be demolished by the monstrous Cerber. The screams of despair and suffering are not heard, but the show is even more disturbing for its silence. The image of souls trapped under ice, frozen in their uncontrollable desire, reflects the worst consequence of gluttony, not only insatiability, but the inability to feel satisfaction, to find peace. Virgilio, who accompanies Dante, begins to explain the punishment of the gluttons, and the explanation is convened RTE in a deeper reflection on sin. Gula is, in a way, the denial of moderation, the lack of respect for the limits. The indulgence in material pleasures not only ruins the lives of those who fall into it, but also moves them away from true satisfaction, from inner peace. It is a sin that feeds on itself, in which desire becomes the prison itself. What seems like a pleasure in life becomes torture in death. The glutton never finds enough, it is always looking for more, always further, but that more does not exist. And when the time comes to face the consequences, it is caught in an endless suffering, with the frozen soul and the eager body of a comfort that never comes. As Dante and Virgil advance by the circle, the cold becomes more unbearable, the thickest ice, and the figures of the most gloomy gluttons. Some of them seem to have been trapped in an eternal gesture of hunger, stretching their hands towards the food that never arrives, towards a comfort they will never get. Others are completely plunged into the ice, as if the sin of their life had made them statues, eternally trapped in their own emptiness. This circle is a reflection of what happens when desire becomes an end in itself, when pleasure is not a means to achieve something greater, but a goal in itself. The gluttony consumes the essence of the human being, and leaves him empty, unable to find a purpose or meaning in his life. Excess, instead of satisfying, leads to desolation. Dante observes with horror and reflection, while the ice continues to fall, without mercy, without truce. Glutton souls are condemned to experience the same emptiness, the same insatiability, again and again. And while the icy rain continues to fall incessantly, Dante begins to understand that the greatest torment of this circle is not only the physical cold, but the feeling of never having found the balance, of having lost the course, of having fallen into a spiral of endless consumption that has left them empty, trapped in the conviction of their own desire. The air in the fourth circle of hell is heavy, dense, loaded with a sensation of constant tension. There are no storms or frozen rains here, but the atmosphere is impregnated with a perpetual struggle, as if the condemned souls were trapped in an endless frustration cycle. Dante and Virgil enter the circle, and the first thing that shows is the sound of the screams, a drowned sound, full of despair. In this circle are the greed and the prodigos, those who in life were consumed by material obsessions. They are souls trapped in their love for gold, for wealth, so the world offered them, but they could never fully enjoy. The greed are those who accumulated wealth incessantly, without thinking about anything or anyone else, only in possession, in the power that money gave them. The prodigos, on the other hand, were those who wasted everything they had, losing their fortune in a waste frenzy, without control or moderation. Both groups share the same condemnation, although their sins were opposed in the form. Greed and prodigality are expensive of the same currency, the sin of getting lost in the material world, of obsessing with what is ephemeral and that cannot grant peace to the soul. The souls of these sinners are trapped in an eternal struggle. The greed and the prodigos do not look, they do not touch, but they are sentenced to a constant interaction. The greed, dragging huge sacks of money, push their charge with effort while fighting to obtain more wealth, always more, as if they could fill the void of their souls with more objects, more power. The prodigos, meanwhile, are spending incessantly, throwing their wealth to the ground, stripping them of them without any purpose, as if the act of spending was the only comfort they know. Both actions are useless, because there is no way to obtain what they are looking for. There is no reward in this circle, only the tireless repetition of an obsession that never ceases. Dante observes the scene with a mixture of amazement and disdain. The souls of the greed move with a frantic energy, as if they could never stop accumulating, while the prodigos seem to be in a state of complete despair, unable to stop in their waste. The greed, with their face marked by greed, fight for their treasures, but there is always something that prevents them from reaching them completely. The prodigos, with the face marked by despair, continue their frantic expense, but never find satisfaction. Both groups are trapped in a routine that has no end, condemned to a life of frustration that reflects how their lives were dominated by the obsession with the material, for the superficial, so in the end, they did not give them peace. The punishment in this circle, it is not so physical and psychological. The pain of souls does not come from external torture, but from the constant repetition of their sins. Greed can never accumulate sufficient wealth to feel complete, and the prods will never find comfort in their waste. In their despair, both are reflected in each other, but unable to stop, without being able to change the course of their actions. Greed condemned them to a constant struggle for what they can never possess, and prodigality condemned them to an eternal void, to a search for satisfaction that they will never find. Dante observes these souls with a feeling of impotence. How can it be that human beings, when they are dragged by the desire to possess or spend without measure, reach this extreme? It is a double condemnation, a conviction that is born from the desire for what it cannot save, from the illusion that wealth, whether accumulated or wasted, can fill an existential vacuum. The souls of this circle are not only punished for their sin, they are also trapped in an endless repetition of the same obsession, again and again, without the possibility of change. Virgil, seeing that Dante is being affected by the scene, explains that greed and prodigality are the reflection of a mismatch in the relationship of human beings with the material. Money, in its various forms, can offer comfort, security, and even power, but when it becomes the center of a person's life, it loses its function. The greed and the prodigos did not know how to use wealth for their own well-being or that of others. Instead of seeing money as a tool, they made it an end in itself. And when the obsession becomes the central purpose of life, which was a good becomes a burden that must be dragged without end. The condemnation in the fourth circle, however, is not just a punishment. It is a bitter lesson for the living. Money and wealth are not the goal, they are not the way to peace. Excess, in any of its forms, is a prison that does not allow the soul to grow. The eternal struggle between greedy and prodigos is a reflection of how excess and lack of control can destroy the human soul. The circle is the place where the futility of living for the material is revealed, where it is made clear that what is most desired in life is what is most hated in death. Dante stops a moment, looking at himself, wondering if at any time he could have fallen into the same traps, if he has ever been caught by the desire to have more, to want more, without measuring the consequences. Time seems to stop for a moment while observing how souls fight in their infinite obsession. The lesson is clear but also painful. Desire without limit, the desire to accumulate or waste, never leads to peace, but to an eternal struggle against oneself. The air becomes dense and cloudy as Dante and Virgil enter the fifth circle of hell. The landscape changes, the earth becomes gloomy, and the atmosphere is filled with a feeling of rot. The Pantano Estigia, a vast and murky sea of muddy waters, extends to them, with a disturbing stillness. This place is not simply a stagnant waters, it is the physical manifestation of anger and laziness, two sins that, although they seem opposite, have a similar devastating effect on human souls. In the Stygia, souls do not flow or swim in the water, they are trapped in it, as if the same swamp would have engulfed them, leaving them in a constant struggle, either in rage or consumed by indifference. The place is marked by a thick fog that drowns the sounds, but at the same time, in some way, amplifies the cries and whispers of the condemned souls. On one side of the swamp, the souls of the iracundos immerse themselves in the murky waters, fighting with a tireless fury. They are trapped in their own anger, unable to escape a cycle of violence that does not cease. Their bodies immerse and resurface, emerging from the swamp to be swallowed again by the water, as if they were trapped in an infinite spiral of anger. There is no rest, there is no resolution. Rabies consumes them and, at the same time, does not allow them to obtain any kind of satisfaction. Among the iracundos, Dante observes a figure that fights more than the others, a soul that seems to be trapped in an endless fury. It is Filippo Argenti, a politician who, in life, was known for his explosive temperament and his ability to cause conflicts. Now, caught in the Estigia swamp, his anger seems stronger than ever. His screams and his gestures of despair resonate strongly in the air, while he is twisted in the murky waters. Every time he tries to reach others, he is alone, caught in an endless sea. The rage he has stripped everything that was once human. Dante observes with a certain bewilderment, as if this anger were beyond any human understanding. However, not only the anger are trapped in the Stygia. On the other shore, lazy are mired in a kind of total apathy. They are souls that have surrendered to life, who have not fought for anything, that have been dragged by the current without purpose, without direction. While angry souls fight incessantly, lazy souls lie still, plunged into the deepest indifference. In their conviction, they cannot do more than be dragged by the swamp, as if their lack of will had plunged them into a sea of total disinterest. They are trapped in a kind of perpetual lethargy, condemned to eternal passivity. The contrast between angry and lazy souls is disconcerting, but at the same time, it is a reflection of the same impotence against life. Anger and laziness, although in principle they seem to be opposite poles, share a common root: lack of control over their own destiny. Iracundos are like unbridled fury, unable to master their emotions, while lazy have abandoned all struggle, abandoning their responsibility for themselves and the world. Both, somehow, have lost control over their lives, and as a consequence, they are trapped in the same place, condemned to live in their own suffering. Dante observes horror how souls are consumed in their own anger or apathy, unable to free themselves. The fury of the iracundos is like a fire that burns incessantly, but can never give them peace. The indifference of the lazy is like an ice that consumes them inside, freezing all their ability to action, but without extinguishing the torment they feel. Neither of the two groups can find an exit, and the swamp seems to be a mirror of their own despair. Anger and laziness not only condemn them to an eternity of suffering, but deprives them of their humanity, the ability to feel something beyond their own passivity or their own fury. Virgil, who has been guiding Dante through this stormy landscape, stops and observes the souls trapped in the Stygia. Ira consumes, and laziness kills in life, he says, with a voice that resonates with a deep sadness. The teaching of this circle is clear, but also painful. The anger, when it is not controlled, becomes a fire that never goes out, that devours those who hold it. And laziness, when it is allowed to take over the soul, it is like a cancer that slowly consumes the ability to live. Both are equally destructive, although in different ways. Both move us away from our humanity, from our ability to be true with ourselves and with others. Dante, while observing the souls of the anger and the lazy, feels a deep remorse. Rabies, frustration, helplessness, passivity. Are these aspects that all human beings carry inside? Are there no times when, trapped in our most primitive emotions, have we let our anger control us? Are there no times when indifference has made us abandon all effort, all impulse to change, to do good? This is the tragedy of the fifth circle, a reminder that, if we are not able to master our emotions, if we are not able to live with purpose, suffering can swallow, like a dark and endless swamp. In the Stygia, souls continue to fight or remain motionless, but in their eyes there is more than simple torment, there is a lesson that they cannot learn. Anger and laziness, like the other sins in this hell, not only destroy the soul, but also move away those who fall from what it really means to be human. The city of Dite rises before Dante and Virgil as a nightmare strength, an insurmountable wall that separates the first circles of hell from the darkest depths. Their high iron towers shine with a red brightness, as if they were red, and the air around vibrates with the suffocating heat that emanates from the flames that seem to devour everything inside the city. The atmosphere is oppressive, loaded with a heavy silence, occasionally interrupted by shouts that pierce stillness as if they were knives. Dante feels that every step he takes towards Dite's doors brings him closer to a more raw and terrifying truth about the nature of sin. After a brief confrontation with the demons that guard the doors, a heavenly power intervenes, allowing Dante and his guide to cross the sixth circle. When entering the city, the landscape changes overwhelmingly. Here, open and burning tombs are the only visible terrain. The graves are not simple graves, they are huge stone sarcophagi, each radiating an internal fire that illuminates the gloom with a light that does not heat, but a sensation of suffocation. Within these graves the souls of the heretics, those who in life denied the fundamental dogmas of faith and chose paths contrary to religious truths. The heat is unbearable, but Dante cannot take the view of the tombs. Each seems to be alive, as if flames within them had a purpose beyond destruction. Souls shout since their burning confinement, but they don't do it to ask for mercy. His screams are of challenge, of pain mixed with a kind of pride. They are not common regrets, they seem to carry with them the same obstinacy that led them to this place. The heretics, those who departed from the teachings considered sacred, are condemned to be consumed by a fire that never ceases, an eternal punishment that reflects the burning nature of their opposite beliefs. While walking between the graves, Dante sees that some of the tombstones are open, with the flames dancing as if they expected new souls. Virgil explains that these are for those who still live in the world, for those who in their mortal life continue to deny the divine truths, and that, when they die, they will occupy their place in these burning graves. This detail worries Dante, because he reminds him that hell is not only a place for the dead, but a warning for the living. In one of the tombs, Dante recognizes a figure. It is Farinata degli Uberti, a Florentine political leader who, despite his courage and leadership, had been convicted of his heretical position. Farinata rises inside her grave as a proud figure, her face marked by pain, but without a trace of repentance. His words are firm, almost challenging, while dialogue with Dante, showing an unwavering pride for his elections in life, even in the face of eternal torment. The conversation is tense, full of contradictory emotions, and Dante cannot avoid feeling a mixture of respect and horror at Farinata's attitude. However, souls in this circle are not only those of the proud. There are also those who, in life, were victims of their own intellect, of their desire to seek responses outside religious teachings, falling into an absolute denial of the sacred. These souls, unlike Farinata, are trapped in a silent torment, consumed by the flames that not only burn their flesh, but also seem to devour their essence, their identity. These souls represent a different tragedy, that of those who, in their search for truth, lost the connection with the divine, with the possibility of redemption. The fire in the sixth circle is not just a physical manifestation, it is a symbol of sin that consumes from within. Heresy, for Dante, is not simply a denial of faith, but a break with the divine order, a rebellion that burns in the soul as a relentless fire. Burning tombs are not only prisons, but also mirrors of the beliefs of heretics, their rejection of universal truths and self-imposed isolation. This isolation, reflected in the confinement of tombs, is both physical and spiritual, an eternal separation from the community of the redeemed. The suffocating heat of the sixth circle seems to intensify as Dante and Virgil advance. Dante feels that his thoughts are confused, that the flames not only consume sinners, but also try to penetrate their mind, sowing doubts. Virgil, with his calm wisdom, reminds him that faith is a shield, protection against the flames of doubt and torment. But even with these words, Dante cannot avoid feeling affected by the environment, by the magnitude of the suffering that surrounds him. The city of Dite, with its burning tombs and its air full of despair, is not just a place of punishment. It is a brutal reminder of the consequences of departing from what is considered the straight path, the importance of beliefs and connection with the divine. But it is also a place that poses questions, which forces Dante and the reader to reflect on the power of thought, on the tension between faith and reason, and how the decisions we make in life can resonate in eternity. While Dante and Virgil prepare to descend to the deepest circles, Dite's fire continues to burn behind them, as if trying to follow them, as if he wanted to even reach those who still have the possibility of redemption. The flames seem to whisper something, a message that Dante cannot decipher at all, but that he feels recorded in his soul, a warning that will accompany him while his descent continues towards the depths of hell. The atmosphere becomes more dense and oppressive while Dante and Virgil descend to the seventh circle of hell, the dominance of violence. The air is loaded with a heat so fierce, accompanied by a metallic smell reminiscent of fresh blood. The landscape is bleak and terrifying, an arid land bathed by the glow of a river of boiling blood that winds like a poisonous snake. This is the Flagellum, the river where those who, in life, committed acts of violence against others are punished. The Flagellum is not a common river, its current does not flow quietly. It is agitated, as if boiling contained. The souls of the convicted are submerged in their scorching waters, some to the ankles, others to the neck, depending on the seriousness of their crimes. The cries of agony fill the air, a heartbreaking choir of pain and despair. Each soul seems to try to escape, but the river does not forgive, their heat devours them, and their strength pushes them again to the place that corresponds to them. Dante observes with horror how the convicted ones are twisted and shout, their bodies deformed by the river torment. Among them are the murderers, the tyrants, the thieves of lives. Their crimes are registered in their faces, as if the suffering had marked them with an irrefutable truth. There is no place to hide here, there is no possibility of redemption. The river is both its punishment and its eternal witness. Custodiating the Flagellum are the centaurs, half-man figures, half-horse, who patrol the banks with implacable surveillance. These mythological beings, commanded by the fierce Charon, are the guardians of this circle. They carry arches and arrows, and their movements are quick, precise, as if they were part of the landscape itself. His task is to ensure that no soul tries to escape the river. Every time one of the condemned souls tries to emerge beyond what is allowed, an arrow crosses the air, sinking into its flesh with brutal precision. The leader of the centaurs, Charon, approaches Dante and Virgil. His figure is imposing, with a look that seems to cross Dante as if he could read his soul. His voice is serious, full of authority, while interrogating Virgil about the presence of a living in this place of eternal death. Virgil, with his characteristic eloquence, explains that Dante is here by divine will, and Charon, although reluctant, agrees to let them pass. However, he assigns Niso, one of his subordinates, to guide them through the river. Niso, with his powerful walk and his penetrating gaze, leads them on the shore of the Flagellum. While advancing, Dante observes the souls consumed in the river. Some crying innocence, others curse their executioners or themselves, but none can escape their destiny. Virgil, always attentive, points to some of the most notable convicted. Among them are Alejandro Magno and Attila the Hun, historical figures that, in life, caused massacres and left behind a trace of destruction. Now, they are mired to the neck in the boiling blood, a punishment that reflects their actions. The Flagellum is more than a physical punishment, it is a representation of violence itself. Red waters are a reminder of the price of blood spill, a symbol of pain and the loss left by violent acts. Each drop of blood in the river seems to shout, an accumulation of suffering that cannot be ignored. Dante feels how this place affects him deeply, how the images of tortured souls are recorded in his mind. As they advance, Dante cannot avoid reflecting on the nature of violence. What leads men to commit such terrible acts? Is ambition, hate, despair? While observing the souls that are discussed in the river, he wonders if the suffering could ever redeem his crimes, if it is possible that he exists something beyond eternal punishment. But the phlegethant does not offer answers, only more questions and endless suffering. The heat of the river seems to intensify, as if hell were alive, reacting to Dante's emotions. Virgil's words resonate in his mind: violence not only destroys the other, it also consumes the one who exercises it. This thought, so simple and at the same time so deep, is suspended in the air while I lead them to the end of the river. The sound of the screams and the roar of the boiling water decreases slightly, but the terror of the place persists. Dante knows that this is only the beginning of the seventh circle, that what he has seen so far is only part of what hell keeps for those who yield to the darkest impulses of humanity. The air becomes colder, but no less oppressive, when Dante and Virgil leave behind the Fargili and enter a completely different landscape, a twisted, dark and bleak forest. The branches of the trees are dry, naked of leaves, and their shapes seem long and deformed fingers that extend towards the sky, as if they would like to start something that they can never reach. There is no life here, neither birds nor animals, just a disturbing silence occasionally interrupted by distant regrets that seem to emerge from everywhere and from nowhere at the same time. The floor is covered with thorns, and when walking, Dante feels that every step sinks more into an atmosphere of despair. This is the suicide forest, the place reserved for those who in life chose to remove existence, rejecting the gift that had been granted to them. Virgil, with a solemn gesture, tells Dante that here you will not find bodies as in other circles, because the souls of these convicted do not rest in human form. Here, suicides are the trees themselves, their spirits trapped forever in a plant form, deprived of movement, of their own voice, of any vestige of humanity. Dante stops in front of one of these trees, intrigued by the regrets emanating from his trunk. However, he fails to understand the origin of the sound until Virgilio, in a solemn but direct gesture, starts a branch. At the moment the wood breaks, a heart-breaking cry fills the air, and from the cut sprouts dark blood, as if the tree itself was alive. The voice that arises from the trunk is deep, loaded with indescribable pain, and begs Virgil to be compassionate, not hurt more. The spirit trapped in the tree explains its destiny. In life, it surrendered to despair and decided to end its earthly suffering, but in doing so, rejected the possibility of redemption and broke the link with the divine. Now, his punishment is being a prisoner of himself, unable to act, to speak freely, condemned to a silence broken only by pain. The tree continues to speak, and its words are full of remorse and self-criticism, but also of a sadness that seems eternal. Dante listens, deeply moved, and wonders how such a great suffering can exist. While they advance more in the forest, Dante notes that not all souls trapped in trees are silent. Some emit soft regrets, as if their voices had been consumed by time, while others seem to be in a constant state of agony, shouting with an intensity that shakes the air around them. Harpiers, monstrous creatures with bodies of female birds and faces, flutter through the forest, tear apart from the branches of the trees. Every time one of them is mutilated, its cry resonates in the forest, filling the atmosphere with an endless echo of pain. Harpiers are more than simple guardians, they are the symbol of perpetual despair that devours these convicted. When feeding on the trees, they perpetuate the torment of the souls that inhabit them, making sure they never find rest. Their claws are sharp, and their movements are erratic, as if they were driven by uncontrollable madness. Dante observes them with horror, unable to understand how an existence so full of suffering can continue indefinitely. In a corner of the forest, a specially twisted tree attracts Dante's attention. Its branches are so intertwined that it seems that you are trying to protect yourself, but when you approach, you listen to a deeper, more intense lament than any other. It is a voice that speaks of repentance, but also of a total resignation. Virgil explains that this tree belongs to a soul that, in life, committed not only the act of taking his life, but also led others to the same destiny. Its torment is double, reflected in the roots that seem to sink more deeply into the ground, as if trying to escape something above and below it. The suicide forest is not just a place of punishment, it is a mirror of despair and disconnection that led these souls to this destination. Each tree, each broken branch, is a reminder of the price of giving up life, of the internal struggle that consumes and destroys. Dante cannot avoid feeling overwhelmed by the sadness that permeates this place, but also feels a deep discomfort. What is he right, a living, to witness this suffering? What can you learn from this pain that seems so immense and so personal? Virgil, receiving Dante's concern, reminds him that this punishment is not only because of the act itself, but for the lack of hope, for the rejection of the possibility of change and redemption. Dante feels a knot in the stomach, as if Virgil's words resonate beyond the scene in front of him, playing something inside his own soul. As they move away from the forest, Dante throws a last look at the trees. The branches continue to stir, the screams continue to resonate, and the harvests continue with their voracious task. This place, so different from the previous circles, leaves an indelible impression. The forest not only speaks of the convicted, talk about the fragility of humanity, the need for waitings are even in the darkest moments. But the road does not stop, and Dante feels that what awaits him will be even more difficult to understand. Heat is unbearable. Dante feels how the air seems to stick to his skin, heavy and burning, while he and Virgil move towards the last segment of the seventh circle. In front of them a landscape extends that seems taken from a nightmare, a vast desert of white sand, blinding, on which they fall incessant flames from a sky without stars. Each grain of sand and each spark of fire seem to be alive, burning with an intensity that challenges the imagination. Here, in this scorching desert, those who committed violence against God, nature, and divine order are punished, blasphemous, sodomites and usurers. The flames fall like an eternal rain, but there is no water to relieve suffering, only fire that devours incessantly. The convicted are scattered by the desert, each trapped in their own torment. Some lie motionless on the burning sand, their bodies covered with burns that never heal. Others run desperately, trying uselessly to escape the flames that fall from heaven, while a few walk slowly, with their heads down, as if they had accepted their destiny. Virgil, with a solemn gesture, points to a man who lies extended on the sand, his eyes fixed in the scorching sky. It is a blasphemous, he explains, someone who in life directly challenged God with words and acts of contempt. The man mutters something between teeth, but his voice is broken, consumed by heat. Dante approaches enough to listen to the words, and what he hears is not regret, but an obstinate fury, as if even in this place of torment the man refused to give in. Later, Dante observes a group that walks in circles through the sand, their slow and painful steps, as if each movement took their lives. They are sodomites, punished by acts that, according to the divine order, went against nature. His constant walk seems an effort to resist suffering, but the flames reach them equally, leaving marks in their bodies that never disappear. Dante looks at one of them, a noble-looking man who, despite the torment, walks erect, with his look at some distant point that only he can see. The man stops and looks at Dante, recognizing him as alive. His voice, although weak, has a dignity that attracts Dante's attention. He speaks frankly, without regrets, and explains that in life he was a man of honor, but that his wishes took him to this place. However, he does not seek compassion, he only asks Dante to remember his name and tell his story when he returns to the world of the living. There is a deep pain in his words, but also an acceptance that is disturbing. In the center of the desert, an even more terrible scene attracts Dante's attention. A group of souls is hunched over, with bags hanging from their necks. They are the usurers, those who, in life, abused nature by profiting excessively with the work of others, deforming the balance between human effort and benefit. Each bag carries a symbol, a brand that identifies the soul with the family or lineage that perpetuated its greed. These souls do not speak. His punishment is so intense that they have no strength to curse their destiny. Dante observes silently, overwhelmed by the suffering that surrounds him. The rain of fire does not cease, and the souls seem more and more part of the landscape, as if the desert had completely absorbed them. Virgil explains that this place represents the ultimate rejection of the natural and divine order, such a serious violation that his punishment must be eternal and absolute. Each grain of sand, every spark of fire, is a reminder of that rejection, a symbol of the rebellion that can never be redeemed. But what impacts Dante the most is not the physical punishment, but the expression of the souls he finds. In his faces there is fury, sadness, resignation, but also a strange sensation of isolation. This desert is not only a place of physical torment, but a space of absolute loneliness, where each soul is trapped in its own suffering, unable to find comfort even in the company of others convicted. The heat seems to intensify as they advance, and Dante feels that their thoughts begin to crumble under the weight of the place. Each step feels heavier, every more difficult breath. Virgil, receiving his fight, assures him that they are close to the end of this circle, but Dante cannot avoid looking back, towards the endless desert they have left behind. The flames continue to fall, the sand still burns, and the screams are lost in the air, as if the desert itself devoured them. However, there is something else in this place, something that Dante cannot define. It is a said desolation that goes beyond physical punishment, a void that seems to reflect not only the pain of souls, but also the rejection they are committed in life. Virgilio urges him to move on, but Dante feels that this desert will be recorded in his mind forever, as a reminder of what it means to depart from the balance between the divine and the human. As Dante and Virgil descend towards the eighth circle of hell, the atmosphere changes once again. This is the place reserved for the fraudulent, those whose malice and deception broke the bonds of trust that support human coexistence. Here, the structure of the punishment is complex and meticulous, divided into 10 graves known as last Malbolge, a term that, even before seeing them, evokes images of darkness, vileness, and calculated suffering. The landscape that opens before them is a vast rocky depression, crossed by 10 concentric pits, each deeper than the previous one. The pits are separated by rock bridges that form an intricate network, as if hell itself had designed to reflect the cunning and sophistication of human deceptions. From the top, Dante can see the souls that fill each pit, each subject to a different punishment, corresponding to the nature of his sin. The air is loaded with an unbearable stench, a mixture of sulfur, rot, and despair that seems to be embodied in the environment itself. Virgil begins to explain the logic behind the Malbolge. Each pit represents a specific form of fraud, from the minor deceptions to the most serious betrayal acts. There is no room for piety or confusion. Each soul is punished exactly according to their fault, in a justice as relentless as it is precise. Dante listens carefully, but can't help feeling a knot in the stomach while preparing to descend to this abyss. The first pit is reserved for seductors and pimps, those who manipulated the wishes of others for their own benefit. Souls run from one place to another, whipped without rest by demons with whips. Their bodies are marked by the scars of the blows, and their screams of pain resonate throughout the circle. Dante observes with horror, noticing how these souls seem to move without purpose, trapped in an endless cycle of suffering and humiliation. Virgil explains that, as in life they used others as tools for their own purposes, they are now treated as mere objects by the demons that torment them. The second pit houses flatterers, those who, with false words, flattered others for their own interest. They are submerged in a well of nauseabundo's excrement, a grotesque punishment that reflects the filth of their lies. Dante feels nausea to see how these souls twist in the mud, covered with dirt, with their voices drowned by the disgusting liquid. His words, which in life were seductive and misleading, are now useless bubbles that are lost in the swamp of their own fraud. As they move towards the third pit, the air becomes heavier. Here are the simoniacs, those who traded with the sacred, selling ecclesiastical positions and betraying the purity of faith. These souls are buried head down in narrow holes, with your legs standing up, while flamers flame consume your feet. His screams of pain are unbearable, and Dante cannot avoid shaking by imagining the torment of being trapped in such an unnatural position, with the fire slowly devouring his flesh. Virgil explains that this punishment reflects his excessive greed, which led them to turn the divine and turn it into a trade object. The fourth pit is a chaos show. Here are the fortune tellers and magicians, those who tried to twist the course of destiny through prohibited arts. Their bodies are deformed, with the heads turned back, forced to walk on their backs forever. Dante observes how these souls try to move forward, but their crooked perspective prevents them from seeing where they are heading. Virgil points out that his punishment is a reflection of his arrogance. In life, they wanted to see beyond the human limit, and now his vision is condemned to look forever backwards. The fifth pit houses the corrupt, those who sold their political or judicial power to the highest bidder. They are submerged in a river of boiling tar, guarded by demons armed with hooks and spears. Every time a soul tries to go to the surface to breathe, the demons push her back to the burning liquid, making sure that her suffering is constant. Dante feels that this punishment is particularly cruel, but Virgil reminds him that in life these souls benefited from corruption, and are now consumed by the same poison they created. The sixth pit is a lugger full of chaos and deception. Here are the hypocrites, dresses with heavy layers of golden lead. From afar, their outfits seem bright and majestic, but when approaching, Dante sees how these layers deform their bodies, forcing them to advance with difficulty. Virgil explains that, in life, these souls hid their true nature under a facade of virtue, and are now condemned to load with the weight of their own falsehood. Virgil stops Dante for a moment, telling him that they need to cross a bridge to continue exploring the remaining graves. From the edge, Dante looks down and feels that Malbolge are an endless well of human suffering, a dark portrait of cunning and evil that humans are able to conceive. The vision fills him with an indescribable fear, but also with a disturbing curiosity for the punishments that are still to be discovered. The march continues, and the echo of screams and regrets resonates as a constant warning, a reminder that human malice has a cost that even death cannot erase. The atmosphere is suffocating, loaded with a darkness that seems to wrap everything. Dante and Virgil cross one of the rock bridges that connect the Malbolge, and the echo of the screams, mixed with a repulsive stench, indicates that they are close to the second pit. Virgil, with its usual calm, points down, where a grotesque show is revealed that embodies the essence of adulation, sinners submerged to the neck in a sea of excrement. The stench is unbearable, and Dante feels nausea when looking at these souls that twist and splash in filth. Their faces, once perhaps beautiful or full of cunning, are now disfigured, covered with dirt that surrounds them. Virgil explains that these are flatterers, those who in life used false and empty words to manipulate and win the favor of others. Now, their languages, which were deception tools, are trapped in the mud that represents the vileness of their actions. Among the screams and groans, Dante perceives a conversation. A soul tries to justify himself, claiming that his compliments were nothing more than a need to survive in a cruel world. But his voice drowns in the mud, and his despair is reduced to bubbles that fade rapidly. Dante, disgusted, departs a moment, unable to withstand the vision for longer. Virgil, with a solemn tone, reminds him that this punishment reflects the servile and despicable nature of his actions. As in life they were reduced to win favor, they are now eternally submerged in their own baseness. The third pit is an even more disturbing vision. Here the simoniacs lie, those who traded with the sacred gifts of the church, selling indulgences and ecclesiastical positions as if they were common merchandise. Their bodies are buried head down in narrow holes, with their legs protruding and stirring desperately. A constant flame burns his feet, and the screams of pain fill the air. Dante observes how the frantic movements of these souls create an almost macabre show, as if trying to escape their confinement, but hopeless to achieve it. Virgil points to one of these souls that seems to burn more intensely than the others. Dante, curious, approaches to listen to her. He is a high priest, a man who occupied a position of great power within the church. Now, his voice is an endless regret, a plea that is lost in a vacuum. "I just followed the example of those who came before me," he shouts, as if trying to justify your actions. But his argument finds no answer, only the whistle of the flames that consume it. Virgil explains to Dante that this punishment reflects the abuse of the divine. As well as in life they invested the sacred order for their benefit, they are now physically invested, their bodies trapped in a hole that symbolizes its spiritual corruption. Dante, full of outrage, wonders how someone who should have been a moral guide could fall so low. But Virgil urges him to follow, reminding him that there is still much to see. The fourth pit is a place of deformity and disorientation. Here are the magicians, fortune tellers, and those who, through prohibited arts, try to manipulate the future and challenge the divine will. Their bodies are twisted in an unnatural way, their heads have been turned back, forcing them to walk while looking eternally in the past. Dante observes with horror how these souls advance with difficulty, stumbling again and again due to their crooked perspective. One of the convicted ones stops for a moment, exhausted, and his eyes intersect with those of Dante. Although his face is full of pain, there is something in his gaze that suggests a melancholic resignation. Virgil explains that this punishment reflects his arrogance in life. When trying to see beyond the human limit, they were condemned attached to never look forward, forced to contemplate their own disobedience forever. Dante feels a mixture of compassion and repulsion when listening to this. Try to imagine the despair of these souls, condemned not only to physical suffering, but also to constant humiliation, where their own bodies become a reminder of their sin. Virgil adds that his punishment also symbolizes spiritual blindness. When trying to predict what did not correspond to know, now their vision is permanently distorted. As they advance, Dante notes that suffering in each pit seems to be more personal, more intimately linked to the nature of sin committed. This is not just a physical punishment, it is a torture of the soul, a reflection of the malice that these souls chose in life. While crossing the bridge towards the next pit, it feels an oppression in the chest, as if the weight of human malice became increasingly unbearable. Virgil, receiving his anguish, reminds him that this trip is not only to observe, but to understand the consequences of human acts. The echo of the regrets continues to resonate, and Dante, although fearful, cannot avoid looking back towards the pit they have left behind. The twisted figures, screams and suffering seem to be recorded in their mind, such as an indelible reminder of the depths to which the human soul can reach when it is given to fraud and malice. Dante and Virgil continue their progress for the Malbolge, descending towards the central graves of the eighth circle of hell. Here, the atmosphere seems even more oppressive, as if the malice that characterizes these sinners had impregnated the air. The tense silence that precedes the cry of a new tormented soul feels like a constant beat, and the stench to despair and guilt becomes unbearable. The sixth pit is occupied by the hypocrites, those who in life hid their true intentions after a virtue facade. At first glance, the show is almost majestic, the solemn procession of figures dressed in bright gold robes, walking slowly, as if they were participating in some sacred ritual. But when approaching, Dante perceives the truth. These robes, although glowing on the outside, are inside heavy like lead, crushing souls under their unbearable weight. Virgil, with a severe tone, explains that these souls simulated goodness and righteousness while in their interior they housed hypocrisy and deception. They are now condemned to load with the literal weight of their falsehood, advancing eternally without rest. The steps of these figures are slow, painful, and each movement seems an agony. One of the convicted, exhausted, collapses to the ground, but his companions step on him without stopping, following his endless march. Dante observes with a lump in the throat, feeling that the suffering of these souls does not come only from their punishment, but also from their isolation. In life they departed from the truth and are now condemned to an existence of loneliness and distrust. Later, in the seventh pit, chaos dominates the atmosphere. Here are the thieves, those who, with cunning and malice, stripped others of what belonged to them. The landscape is a nest of twisted snakes that crawl among the condemned souls, attacking them mercilessly. Dante observes with horror how these snakes bite sinners, whose bodies are transformed into ashes only to regenerate and suffer again. It is an eternal cycle of destruction and resurrection, a representation of the corrosive nature of theft, which not only destroys the stolen, but also the thief himself. Suddenly, one of the snakes rises around a soul and begins to merge with it. Dante contemplates in amazement how the body of the sinner and that of the snake becomes a hybrid creature, a grotesque mixture of human and reptile. Virgil explains that this punishment reflects the mutable and furtive nature of the thieves, which in life appropriated the alien and are now stripped of their own humanity, becoming something that is no longer human or beast. Dante recognizes one of the transformed souls. It is Vanni Fucci, a notorious thief of Pistoia. With an arrogant gesture, Vanni insults Dante before being attacked again by a snake, his words interrupted by a shout of pain. The scene leaves Dante restless, not only for the suffering he witnessed, but also for the challenging attitude of the sinner, who seems to have not learned anything about his punishment. In the eighth pit, the air changes again. Here are the fraudulent advisors, those who used their intelligence and rhetorical skills to manipulate and deceive others. The landscape is a flame ocean, each of which encloses a condemned soul. The flames move as if they are alive, twisting in the air, and its bright colors contrast with the surrounding darkness. Dante observes how these flames seem to whisper, as if trying to convey the words that were used in life. Virgil points out a particularly high and vibrant flame, which encloses two souls together. They are Ulysses and Diomede, whose tricks in life led to the fall of Troy. Dante listens to his story, narrated with a mixture of repentance and pride, and feels a stab of sadness to see how even the brightest minds can be corrupted by the desire for power and success at any cost. Another flame, smaller but equally disturbing, attracts Dante's attention. Within it is Guido da Montefeltro, a political advisor who in life offered fraudulent advice in exchange for power. Guido, aware of his sin, tells how he was persuaded by a religious leader to perform an act of betrayal, believing that he would be acquitted. Now, his conviction is eternal, caught in the fire that symbolizes the burning words of deception they pronounced in life. While they move away from the eighth pit, Dante feels a mixture of emotions: repulsion for the vileness of the acts he witnessed, compassion for the souls trapped in eternal suffering, and a growing awareness of human capacity for evil. The echoes of the screams and the roar of the flames remain in their mind while heading to the next bridge, knowing that what is to come will be even more disturbing. The air in the final pits of the eighth circle is dense and loaded with a silence that is only broken by screams of agony and heartbreaking regrets. Dante and Virgil advance with caution towards the ninth and 10th pit, where malice reaches more extreme forms. Here are the sowers of discord and the counterfeiters, souls condemned for dividing and corrupting what it should remain in full. Each step seems to sink Dante more in the dark, where the consequences of sin acquire a frightful physical. The ninth pit is presented as a scenario of raw and perpetual brutality. The souls condemned are torn, literally cut and mutilated by demons that wield sharp swords. These demons do not show mercy, his cuts are meticulous, designed to inflict maximum pain. The wounds of souls, although deep and bloody, are regenerated continuously, only to be open again in an endless cycle of suffering. Virgil explains to Dante that these are the sowers of discord, those who in life cause divisions between families, communities, religions, or nations. Now, their punishment reflects the fragmentation they caused, being themselves divided again and again. Dante observes with horror how a figure approaches himself staggering, his one and hanging from his body. He is Muhammad, condemned for his role in religious division. With a broken voice, he recounts his suffering, his words interrupted by the groans of others who share his destiny. Not far, Dante recognizes another sinner, Bertrand de Born, who in life prompted a son's rebellion against his father. Bertrand walks carrying her own decapitated head like a flashlight, holding her by the hair while the head itself shouts for the words of condemnation and regret. The show is grotesque, a visual representation of the tear that caused in human relations. Dante feels a mixture of compassion and repulsion while listening to the stories of these souls, who, despite their suffering, seem to proudly revive the acts that condemned them. The 10th and last pit is a place of pestilence and degradation. Here are the counterfeiters, those who in life corrupt the truth or material things through their actions. The air is impregnated with a nauseating stench, and the soil is full of bodies that twist in horrible diseases. Some are swollen as if they were to explode, others suffer purulent sores that drip incessantly. The screams of pain are deafening, but what impacts Dante the most is the atmosphere of absolute despair that surrounds this place. Virgil points out the different categories of counterfeiters: the alchemists, who corrupted metals; the imitators, who falsified identities; the false witnesses, who distorted the truth; and currency counterfeiters, which destroyed economic trust. Each suffers a torment according to their sin. Dante observes how two souls infected with a violent fever face each other in a wild fight, biting and hitting as rabid beasts. One of them is Capocchio, an alchemist who in life manipulated substances to create illusions of wealth. Now, his body and mind are consumed by madness, a reflection of the corruption he sowed. In another part of the pit, a woman, whose skin is covered with sores that bleed constantly, is striking Dante Ion. It is Myrrha, who in life falsified his identity to commit an incestuous act. Now, his suffering is double. His body is broken and bleeding, but is also trapped in an eternal solitude, even rejected by the other convicted. Virgil explains that her punishment symbolizes the decomposition of human relations that she corrupted. The atmosphere in this pit is not only of physical suffering, but also of humiliation. Souls are not only tormented by their pain, but are forced to face the effects of their corruption in life. Dante feels overwhelming in the chest when observing the souls condemned here, each marked by a betrayal of truth, an act that destroyed trust, purity, or harmony. As Dante and Virgil move away, the sound of the screams and the stench of the 10th pit persist, leaving an indelible mark on Dante. Virgil, receiving the tension on his face, reminds him that the final circle, the one to come, contains an even more unfathomable malice, reserved for traitors. Dante feels a chill to travel his body, aware that the worst is yet to be revealed. The air in the 9th circle of hell is not heavy as in the previous pits, it is ice cream, sheer, as if each breath started life from the lungs. Before Dante and Virgil, the Cosito Lake opens, a vast and desolate ice mirror that encloses traitors. There is no fire or flame here, just an inhuman cold that covers the soul, as the reflection of the betrayals that froze trust and love in life. The lake is divided into several regions, each destined for a particular type of betrayal. In the first region, called Cain in honor of Cain, traitors are found to the family. These souls are trapped to the neck on the ice, their pale faces and their frozen eyes in an expression of eternal suffering. His tears, which should offer some relief, solidify instantly, catching their emotions in a life imprisonment. Dante observes a figure whose face is distorted by hatred and repentance. Virgil explains that this is Mordred, the traitor who raised his sword against King Arturo, his own uncle. Mordred, trapped in the ice, tries to move, but the cold immobilizes it. You can only speak in cold whispers, your words full of resentment and despair. Seeing him, Dante feels a weight on his chest, as if the cold cooked had infiltrated his own soul. Beyond, in the region called Antinora, there are the traitors to the country. Here souls are completely submerged in the ice, some of them with barely visible faces under a frost layer. The cold here is more intense, a reminder of how the betrayal of the community breaks the ties that support society. Dante feels how his own steps resonate on the ice, as if walking on the same trusted cracks that these sinners created. Suddenly, Dante stumbles with a particularly disturbing scene, two souls trapped together on the ice, one devouring the head of the other with animal fury. Virgilio, without flinching, explains that the sinner who is being devoured is the Count Ugolino, who in life betrayed Pisa, his hometown, but to whom his executioner, the Archbishop Ruggieri, also betrayed, condemning him to die of hunger next to your children. The Count, unable to forget his suffering, now perpetuates his hatred by biting his traitor. Dante, horrified, bends down to listen to the story of Ugolino. With an broken voice, the Count recounts how he and his children were locked in a tower without food, sentenced to die slowly. He describes the indescribable pain to see his children perish, and how, in his despair, he cursed not only Ruggieri, but also to heaven. The intensity of his story makes Dante feel a chill that has nothing to do with the cold of the lake. When Ugolino ends, he sinks his teeth again into Ruggieri's head, as if his hatred was the only thing that kept him alive in his eternal suffering. While advancing, Dante cannot avoid reflecting on the nature of betrayal. In this circle, there is no redemption, only isolation and pain that seems eternal. Cosito ice not only imprisons the bodies of traitors, but also their souls, freezing any possibility of human heat, love or repentance. Virgil, with serious look, warns him that what is to come will be even more heartbreaking. Dante, with heavy heart, can barely look forward, fearing what the cold will reveal to him. The descent towards the deepest part of hell leads Dante and Virgil to the most frozen and silent region of Cosito, Giudecca, the nucleus of the 9th circle, where betrayal reaches its maximum vileness. Here are the traitors to their guest aids and benefactors, souls who committed the lowest and most despicable acts in violating the sacred ties of hospitality and trust. The air becomes still and oppressive, as if even time was frozen in this grave of eternal despair. The landscape is terrifyingly simple, a vast sea of ice, smooth and bright, which reflects a pale and sick light. Souls are completely trapped inside the ice, as if they were insects trapped in amber. There are no shouts, just a sepulchral silence that seems to amplify the weight of sin that imprisons them. Virgilio points with a solemn gesture towards the figures trapped, explaining that here the punishment is not only the physical isolation, but also the absolute oblivion. These souls are so deeply frozen that even their names have begun to fade into the memory of the world. Dante advances cautiously, his look fixed on the distorted forms under the ice. One of the souls barely moves his eyes to follow him, and his pleading gaze drills Dante's heart. The expression of agony is so deep that it seems to tell an entire story of betrayal and regret without the need for words. But Virgil urges him to continue, pointing to the center of Giudecca, where the most feared figure of hell is located. There, in the epicenter of the circle, lies Lucifer, the original traitor, caught up to half of his body on eternal ice. Its shape is colossal, and its presence darkens everything around it. His 3 heads, each eternally chewing a traitor, are a pure horror show. The jaws chew slowly and ruthlessly, crushing flesh and blood just to recommend, in an endless cycle of pain. In the central head, Lucifer massacred Judas Iscariot, the disciple who betrayed Jesus. His body hangs with an almost mechanical movement, each bite starting a mute cry that is never heard. Judas is face down, his face sunk in the ice, while Lucifer tears his back with a methodical cruelty. Virgil explains that his position reflects the nature of his betrayal. By giving the Son of God for some coins, Judas not only betrayed a man, but also the sacred pact between heaven and humanity. In the other 2 heads are Gros and Casio, the traitors who conspired against Julio Caesar, the man who represented the cusp of the political order and earthly justice. Gros, whose expression seems to be trapped between pain and resignation, suffers with a decent silence, while Casio, with desperate gestures, seems to fight uselessly against his destiny. Both are crushed and chewed without mercy, their bodies torn again and again as an eternal reminder of their betrayal to the power that protected them. Dante, unable to look away, feels that the horror of the scene oppresses it as a physical load. The beating of Lucifer's wings, huge and black, produces an icy wind that keeps the Cosito Lake frozen. Each blow of those wings is a reminder of the fall of the angel that was once the most beautiful and powerful, and now is the most miserable being in the universe. Its very existence is a monument to betrayal, and its perpetual pain, self-imposed, reflects the evil that was born in its heart. The cold here is different, not only physical, but spiritual. Dante feels that his own soul is being reached by the despair that emanates from the place, as if the weight of all the betrayals of the world tried to sink it into the ice. Virgil takes him by the hand, his serious but firm face, and he tells him that the time has come to leave. Dante, with his eyes still fixed on Lucifer and the traitors who suffer in their jaws, feel a knot in their throat, as if the words could not express the impact of what he has witnessed. While they move away, the icy wind produced by Lucifer seems to push them up, moving them away from the depths of hell. But the echo of suffering and the weight of the betrayal views remain with Dante, marking it with an invisible scar that will take with him while he continues his trip. The center of hell is a place where time seems to have stopped. There is no fire here, no screams, or movement, only an oppressive silence and a cold so intense that it seems to devour all heat and hope. Dante, guided by Virgil, reaches the darkest core of creation, the point where betrayal and sin reach its maximum expression. Here is Lucifer, the fallen angel, the prince of hell, caught eternally in the ice of the Cook Lake. The vision is overwhelming. Lucifer, also known as Satan, occupies a colossal place in the center of the circle. Its huge form challenges the imagination, a monstrous being with 3 heads, each of a different color. The central head is red, symbol of anger and hate, the head of the left is black, representing ignorance and it is peer, and the head of the right is yellow, reflection of impotence and cowardice. Its 6 wings, huge and membranous like those of a bat, beaten slowly, generating an icy wind that freezes the Cooker Lake and ensures the perpetuity of the punishment of souls trapped in the ice. Lucifer is half buried in the ice, with his torso immobilized in the cold prison he created when he rebelled against God. His body emanates an unnatural force, but also a silent patetism. Its absolute immobility contrasts with the constant beating of its wings, a useless movement that only intensifies its condemnation. His eyes, giants and dark, seem to reflect an infinite abyss, as if they contained the echo of glory that he once had and lost. Dante cannot look away from Lucifer's jaws, where the 3 great traitors of humanity are trapped, Judas Iscariot, Gros and Casio. Each bite is an act of hate and domination, an eternal cycle of suffering that reflects the very essence of hell. But beyond the punishment of these souls, which truly impresses Dante is the figure of Lucifer himself, a being that was once the most beautiful angel and loved by God. Virgil, with a serious voice, explains the fall of Lucifer. In the beginning, he was Luzbel, the bearer of the light, the most glowing of the heavenly angels. Its beauty was such that even the stars seemed pale compared to their splendor. But his pride led him to rebel against God. Luzbel, believing the Creator, he got up next to a third of Los Angeles in a battle for heaven. He was defeated, and his punishment was not only expulsion, but the transformation. Its beauty became a monstrosity, and its light, into the deepest darkness. When it fell, its impact created hell itself, an abyss that pierced the earth. In his fall, Luzbel brought his hatred and ambition, but also his desolation. Now, caught in the center of this abyss, Lucifer not only punishes, but is punished. Its very existence is a testimony of what it means to challenge the divine order and succumb to pride. Despite his immensity, Lucifer does not inspire only terror, it also emanates an infinite sadness. Dante, moved, can't help feeling that it is facing more than a monster. There is a tragedy in the figure of the Prince of Hell, a being condemned to load with the weight of his own rebellion for all eternity. His ice imprisonment is not only a punishment, but also a symbol. A being that once aspired to absolute greatness is now completely immobilized, unable to achieve anything, not even the release of his own torment. Virgil, with an urgency tone, tells Dante that they should continue. The ice cries under his feet as they approach Lucifer's very base. There, a narrow passage seems to take to the other side, towards an unknown world. But before leaving, Dante throws one last look at the fallen angel, trying to understand the abyss of his conviction. In Lucifer's eyes there is no trace of repentance, just a vacuum that seems to engulf everything he touches. Silence in the center of hell weighs on Dante as a slab, and while preparing to leave this place, he feels that he can never forget what he has seen, not only the punishment of the traitors, but the echo of an excessive pride that converted the brightest light in the darkest shadow. The concept of divine justice in the Divine Comedy of Dante Alighieri raises questions that have challenged humanity for centuries. Is an eternal punishment an act of absolute justice or an excessive sample of severity? While Dante travels through the circles of hell, each penalty seems designed with a precision that reflects the sin committed. But at the same time, these images arouse a moral dilemma. Is it truly just an endless suffering? In every corner of hell, punishment becomes a mirror of sin. According to this vision, any transgression against the Creator, even the smallest, is infinitely serious, since God himself is infinite. Medieval theologians, como Tomás de Aquino, defended that hell is not simply a place of punishment, but a manifestation of the definitive separation between the soul and God. The convicted souls chose this destiny through their actions, moving away from the supreme good and hugging their own selfish desires. In this sense, eternal punishment is not arbitrarily imposed, but is the logical consequence of a free choice. But this explanation does not completely dissipate the discomfort that many feel at the idea of endless suffering. Some philosophers, as Origins in Christian antiquity, argued in favor of apokatastasis, the eventual redemption of all souls, even the most lost. For Origins, divine justice should be impregnated with mercy, and the idea that God would allow eternal punishment contradicted his infinite love. Although these ideas were convicted as heresy in their time, they still resonate today in modern debates about the nature of God and the morality of hell. On the other hand, Dante presents his hell as a reflection of the medieval vision of justice. There is no place here for late repent. Souls are frozen in their final state, unable to change, because their choice in life has already been taken. This raises a rigid vision of justice that contrasts with more contemporary concepts, where punishment is considered not only as compensation, but also as an opportunity for rehabilitation. The absence of any possibility of redemption in Dante's hell leaves the reader with a feeling of desolation that challenges the modern understanding of divine compassion. The debate also revolves around the proportion of punishment. Is eternal suffering proportional to the sins of a soul? In Dante's logic, hell not only punishes, but educates the reader. When traveling the circles, Dante observes how each punishment not only inflicts pain, but also transmits a clear moral message: sins have consequences. However, this lesson becomes more difficult to accept when the eternal duration of suffering is considered. For some, eternal punishment seems more an expression of revenge than justice. The dilemma of divine justice is not only theological or philosophical, but also deeply emotional. How to reconcile the idea of a merciful God with the image of burning souls or frozen forever? Dante himself, as a narrator, shows moments of compassion for the convicted, crying for some of them or showing horror against their sorrows. But his guide, Virgil, constantly reminds him that this compassion is useless in hell. Here, everything is governed by immutable justice. Dante's internal fight as a character reflects the tension that many feel when facing the idea of eternal punishment. Finally, the debate on divine justice in the context of hell does not have a definitive response. For some, the eternity of punishment is an affirmation of the supremacy of God and the seriousness of sin. For others, it raises unresolved issues about the nature of divine justice and love. Lucifer's image trapped in the ice, beating its wings in a useless cycle, seems to be encapsulated, a being that chose to rebel against God and is now caught in an existence of perpetual suffering, as well as the souls that surround it. Divine justice, as Dante presents it, does not seek to please the reader, but to confront it with questions that transcend time and beliefs. Free will is the key that defines the fate of souls in the moral universe of the Divine Comedy. In each circle of hell, every penalty, and every condemned soul, there is a constant: the elections they made in life. Dante confronts us with a blunt reality and sometimes uncomfortable. Each punishment is not an accident or arbitrary imposition, it is the direct result of conscious acts and decisions that souls made while still had the ability to choose. From the first encounter with those convicted in Limbo to the icy abysses of the ninth circle, the message is clear: free will is both a blessing and a burden. Souls had the ability to choose between good and evil, between virtue and sin. And although the paths of sin often seem more tempting, the consequences of these elections are revealed with a relentless severity. One of the most moving moments of this reflection occurs with Francesca and Paolo in the Circle of Lust. Francesca describes how a shared reading aroused a passion that led them to sin and, finally, to their conviction. His words are full of pain and romanticism, but under their lament a truth underlies: they chose to succumb to their wishes. They could have resisted, they could have taken a different path, but they did not. Here, Dante shows the free will weight: the choice of a moment can define an eternity. Free will also relate to the notion of moral responsibility. In Dante's world, there is no space for excuses or to blame circumstances. Even sinners who seem to have been dragged by their passions or by external forces are marked by the imprint of their will. This becomes evident in the case of Ulysses, whose bold search for knowledge and adventure led him to ignore the limits imposed by the gods. Its history, although full of nobility and courage, becomes a reminder of how the choice to disobey the divine can lead to perdition. However, the idea of free will is not only about individual decisions, but also the environment in which these decisions are made. Dante acknowledges that life is full of challenges, temptations and evidence that can hinder the choice of the right path. But even in the most difficult circumstances, he insists that each soul retains the ability to choose. This statement is what makes divine justice, according to Dante, unquestionably fair. There is no punishment that has not been deserved, because each soul chose its destiny with full conscience. Virgil's role in the poem also underlines the importance of free will. As Dante's guide, it represents reason and discernment, tools that the human being has to exercise his will wisely. Virgil does not force Dante to continue his way, rather, he offers advice and warnings, letting Dante make his own decisions. This dynamic reflects the relationship between human being and divine morality. God can guide, but not strength. The final choice always falls to the individual. However, free will also have a dark side, the load of responsibility. Each decision has consequences, and these cannot be avoided. Hell is the testimony of this immutable truth. In this sense, free will is both a release and a conviction. Liberation, because it allows the individual to forge his own destiny; condemn, because he makes him responsible for his elections, even when they lead to eternal suffering. The deepest contrast in the Divine Comedy is in the comparison between those convicted in hell and souls that reach salvation in paradise. Both categories have something in common: free will. The saved also faced temptations, also had the possibility of deviating the straight path. But they chose good, even when this required sacrifices and resignations. This ability to resist, to persevere in virtue, is what elevates them to God. The free will, then, is not just a tool for action, it is also a constant proof of human will. Every day, every moment, it presents large and small decisions that bring us closer or move us away from the divine. And although Dante shows that eternal punishment is the consequence of a wrong choice, it also suggests that life itself is an opportunity to correct the course. But in hell, that opportunity no longer exists. The convicted have lost forever the ability to choose. The free will, which once was its greatest power, is now just a distant memory, a shadow that intensifies its suffering. In this context, hell is not only a place of punishment, but also a reminder of what it means to lose the ability to choose good. The free will is, ultimately, the heart of Dante's work. It is what defines the humanity of souls, which connects them with the divine and what, paradoxically, can separate them from it. In the universe of the Divine Comedy, there is no default destination, there is no chance or external force that determines the course of life. It all depends on the human will, on that internal power that can lead to both redemption and condemnation. In the hell of Dante Alighieri, politics is intertwined with spiritual condemnation, revealing not only the tensions of his time, but also his critical vision of corruption and earthly power. The historical characters that Dante finds in his descent are not there by chance, its destinations in the hereafter reflect the political and social wounds that marked medieval Florence and, more widely, the Italy of its time. Dante is not afraid to point out with the finger to powerful figures or condemn those who, according to him, betrayed the ideals of justice and common good. His hell thus becomes a theater where the souls of kings, potatoes, politicians, and military leaders suffer from the consequences of their excessive ambitions and selfish decisions. In each circle, political sinners personify the conflicts that divided Florence and other Italian states, such as the struggles between Guelfos and Ghibellinos or between factions and factions known like white and black Guelfos. One of the clearest examples of this connection between politics and condemnation is the presence of Filippo Argenti, a noble Florentino who appears in the fifth circle of hell, where the anger lies submerged in the Estigia swamp. Argenti, a member of a rival family of the Alighieri, symbolizes not only Dante's personal enmity, but also the political chaos that resulted from the struggle for power in Florence. His eternal fury reflects the state of anger that Florentina's policy consumed, where personal disputes often eclipsed common well-being. In the eighth circle, reserved for fraudulent, we find figures such as Pope Nicholas III, condemned by simony, the sin of selling ecclesiastical positions. Nicholas III represents the corruption of the Church, which in Dante's time was deeply involved in Italian politics. His punishment, being buried head down in a hole while his feet burn, is a fierce criticism of the use of religion as a tool of political and economic power. Dante uses his encounter with Nicholas III to launch a direct accusation against other potatoes, such as Bonifacio VIII, whom he also considers guilty of corrupt practices. This inclusion is not only a theological issue, but a political statement on the destructive impact of excessive ambition within the Church. Another significant moment is the encounter with Brunetto Latini in the seventh circle, among the Sodomites. Latini, Dante's mentor, is not convicted of his teachings or for his political life, but for what Dante interprets as a moral deviation. However, its appearance is also loaded with political implications. Latini was a prominent Florentine official and a symbol of the city's intellectual and political elite. His punishment reflects Dante's ambivalent vision towards Florentine politics, a mixture of respect for intellectual capacity and a criticism of moral corruption that often accompanied her. The deepest circle of hell, the ninth, is reserved for traitors, and here the policy reaches its darkest point. In this ice cream we find figures like Ugolino della Giradesca, a Count of Pisa who, according to the chronicles, was locked up with his children in a tower by betrayal. Ugolino is convicted not only for his alleged political betrayal, but also for the brutality of the punishment he received in life, which makes him a symbol of excesses and ruthless revenge that characterized the Italian policy of his time. The ninth circle also houses biblical and classic characters like Judas Iscariot, but what highlights in Dante's hell is how these universal figures with characters from the recent history of Italy. This reinforces the idea that political sins are not only issues of the ancient past, but persistent problems that continue to corrupt the structures of human power. Through these convictions, Dante not only denounces the sins of his time, but also proposes a vision of politics as a moral sphere. For him, politics is not simply a struggle for power, it is a means to achieve the common good and justice. Those who use their position for their own benefit, or who betray public trust, not only fail to fulfill their earthly responsibilities, but also condemn themselves in the spiritual level. In the broader context of the work, the use of historical characters underlines the universality of the issues of justice and corruption. Although specific names and circumstances belong to Dante's time, power dynamics, excessive ambition, and personal betrayals resonate with a timeless relevance. His hell is, in many ways, a mirror of any society where personal interest surpasses common well-being. Dante's hell is a deeply political work not only for the characters that it includes, but also for the ideas it promotes. In his criticism of corrupt leaders and in their defense of justice as a universal principle, Dante reveals an ethical vision that transcends his time. His condemnation of specific historical figures is not only an act of literary revenge, but a call to reflect on how our political and ethical decisions mold not only the earthly world, but also, according to their vision, our eternal destiny. In the heart of Dante Alighieri's hell lies a fundamental question: what is sin and how should be punished? Through his monumental work, Dante presents a meticulous classification of sins, influenced by both medieval theology and by his own moral and spiritual interpretation. Each circle of hell is carefully designed to reflect the severity of the sin that houses, making clear that not all sins are equal, neither in its nature nor in its consequences. The structure of hell follows a moral hierarchy based on the theology of thinkers such as Thomas de Aquinas and San Augustine, who distinguished between sins of weakness, sins of malice, and sins of violence. For Dante, sin is not simply a transgression, it is a conscious decision that alienates the individual of divine grace. This alienation is the central axis of its classification, which organizes the sins of less to greater severity based on the intentionality and damage caused. In the upper circles of hell are sins of incontinence, those committed by weakness or lack of self-control. These sins are the closest to humanity in terms of understanding, since they arise from natural desires that were not adequately governed. Lust, gluttony, greed, and anger are found in this category. For example, in the second circle, the lustful ones are punished by being dragged eternally by a violent wind, a symbol of the uncontrolled passions that dominated them in life. This punishment reflects not only the nature of sin, but also the inability of these sinners to resist their impulses. However, even in these minor sins, Dante emphasizes individual responsibility. Souls are not in hell for feeling desire or anger, but for not having exercised their free will to control these impulses. Here, sin is presented as a failure in virtue, an inability to moderate human inclinations within the limits that God has established. As we descend, we find the sins of violence in the seventh circle, divided into three subcategories: violence against others, violence against oneself, and violence against God and nature. These sins are more serious than those of incontinence because they imply a deliberate action to cause damage, whether physical, emotional, or spiritual. The murderers, for example, are submerged in a river of boiling blood, monitored by armed centaurs, a punishment that reflects the spill of blood that caused in life. The lowest level of hell is reserved for the sins of malice and betrayal, those who imply a calculated intention of harming others. Here, Dante shows his deepest contempt, because these sins not only offend God, but also destroy the ties of trust and love that support human coexistence. In the eighth circle, we find the fraudulent, divided into 10 moles that reflect the different forms of deception, from flatterers to counterfeiters. In the ninth circle, traitors are punished in the Cosito ice clay lake, their immobility symbolizing the coldness of their hearts and actions. This hierarchy not only reflects the moral severity of sin, but also its impact on the divine and human order. Incontinent sins mainly affect the sinner and, to a lesser extent, those around him. The sins of violence damage both and the sinner itself, while the sins of malice are the most destructive, since they corrupt the fabric of society and violate the most sacred principles of the relationship between men and with God. Dante also incorporates elements of the doctrine of the 7 capital sins, although he organizes them differently. Lust, gluttony, greed, and anger are present in upper circles, while envy and superb appear more implicitly at the lower levels. The laziness, although it does not have a specific circle, is hinted at the swamp of the iracundos, where the lazy are submerged in the water, unable to move, reflecting its apathy in life. The classification of sins in hell also highlights the concept of poetic justice, where punishment conforms to sin in a perfect symbolic correspondence. This not only reinforces the idea that God is fair, but also allows Dante to explore the nature of sin visually and emotionally. Each punishment is a reminder of the seriousness of sin and the eternal consequences of human elections. Beyond its theological value, the classification of sins in Dante's hell is a reflection on the human condition. In his vision, we are all able to sin, but we also have the power to resist and redeem ourselves. Hell is not only a place of punishment, but also a mirror that forces us to confront our own weaknesses and question our choices. In the end, what emerges from this classification is not only a hierarchy of sins, but a call to personal responsibility and the constant search for virtue. Dante reminds us that sin is not an inevitable destiny, but a choice, and that, while we are alive, we always have the opportunity to choose good about evil. In its vast moral cosmos of the Divine Comedy, Dante Alighieri weaves a complex network of punishments and rewards that reflects divine justice in its purest form. Hell, purgatory, and paradise are not only different scenarios, but tangible manifestations of the duality inherent in the destiny of souls. Each kingdom offers a unique perspective about punishment and reward, and together they make up a complete remuneration system based on the moral elections of individuals. Hell, with its gloomy architecture and its atmosphere of hopelessness, embodies eternal condemnation. Here, souls are punished not only for their actions, but for their refusal to repent. Sinners face accurately designed torments, which in symbolic and poetic form of their faults. This idea of poetic justice, where punishment is a distorted mirror of sin, reinforces the sense of order in hell chaos. Gluttons suffer under a reign of filth because in life they surrender to excess. The traitors, submerged in the ice of the ninth circle, experience the cold of their betrayal. Hell is, therefore, a static place, where there is no possibility of redemption or progress. Souls are condemned to eternally repeat the consequences of their elections. The despair that wraps this kingdom is summarized in the registration at its door: abandon all hope, those who enter. It is a definitive place of punishment, where mercy has been replaced by relentless justice. In contrast, purgatory is a kingdom of hope. While hell represents the final price of disobedience to God, purgatory offers a purification opportunity for those who died repentant, but with sins not yet exposed. Souls are not trapped here in an eternal cycle of suffering, but slowly progress towards redemption. The punishment in purgatory is temporary and has a corrective purpose. For example, the proud must load heavy stones to learn humility, and the angry are wrapped in blinding smoke to understand the damage of their anger. The rhythm of purgatory is deliberate, marked by the effort of souls to ascend the mountain. Each step is an act of penance and an approach to divine grace. Hope shines at each level, symbolizing that even the most intense suffering can have a redeeming purpose. Here, pain is not an end in itself, as in hell, but a means to achieve purification and reconciliation with God. Finally, paradise is the supreme reward for virtuous souls, a place of eternal joy where suffering and struggle have been overcome. Unlike hell and purgatory, paradise is not structured around punishment, but of the reward and divine love. Souls in paradise experience perfect joy, reflection of their proximity to God. Here, Dante uses light as a central symbol. The closer to the Creator, the more intense and pure is luminosity. In paradise, divine justice is manifested not in terms of proportional punishments, but as the definitive reward for those who chose good. Each soul occupies a place in the celestial hierarchy that corresponds to its merit, and yet all experience a complete joy, since their will is completely aligned with that of God. The contrast between hell and paradise is particularly marked in the emotional experience of the characters. While hell is full of shouts, regrets, and chaos, paradise resonates with heavenly music and harmony. In hell, sinners are separated from God and among them, consumed by hatred and pain. In paradise, souls are united in a perfect love, both with each other and its Creator. Dante uses purgatory as a bridge between these extremes, a representation of the spiritual transformation that is possible for those who seek redemption. This intermediate kingdom underlines the idea that punishment is not always definitive, and that divine mercy allows correction and change. Through the duality of punishment and reward, Dante not only presents a system of divine justice, but also a deep reflection on human elections. Every soul we find on your trip is a testimony of how our actions in life have eternal consequences. The three kingdoms are not simply physical places, they are states of the soul, and each one reflects an aspect of the relationship between the human being and the divine. The contrast between the kingdoms also raises universal questions. Is the eternal punishment compatible with divine mercy? How to reconcile justice with the infinite love of God? Dante does not offer easy answers, but his work invites us to reflect on our own morality and the legacy we leave behind. In the end, what is clear is that each action has weight, and that the reward or punishment is not arbitrarily taxes, but that they are the inevitable result of our own decisions. Since its creation, Dante Alighieri's Hell has served as an inexhaustible source of inspiration for artists, writers, and musicians over the centuries. The visual, symbolic, and emotional force of the infernal circles has transcended literature, influencing the creation of works that interpret, amplify, and transform the Dantesque vision of eternal punishment. These artistic interpretations not only reflect the admiration for the Divine Comedy, but also the universal impact of their themes: sin, justice, redemption, and human condition. One of the most iconic and known interpretations is the series of engravings by French artist Gustave Dore in the 19th century. Dore captured the essence of Dante's Hell with shady and dramatic images that project the despair and monumentality of the original text. His engravings, such as the representation of Charon guiding his boat or the torment of the lustful dragged by an eternal wind, have become archetypal images associated with the work. Through a masterful use of the chiaroscuro, Dore infused life of Dante's words, highlighting the tension between the misery of the convicted and the majesty of divine justice. In the field of painting, artists such as Sandro Botticelli also left their mark on the interpretation of hell. Botticelli created a series of detailed drawings based on the Divine Comedy, including his famous illustration of the Hell Map. In this work, hell is represented as a descending spiral that culminates in the center of the earth, where Lucifer lies. Cartographic precision and detail attention in the figures and scenarios reflect Dante's thoroughness when describing each circle and its corresponding punishment. In the Renaissance, the obsession with hell expanded beyond the visual arts. Literature took Dante's influence to explore his own visions of the underworld. Writers such as John Milton, in The Lost Paradise, and Geoffrey Chaucer, in The Tales of Canterbury, adapted elements of Dantesque hell to enrich their narratives. Dante's work marked a before and after in the conceptualization of eternal punishment, and his influence can be traced in innumerable texts that address morality, sin, and divine justice. Music has also been a powerful vehicle to express the atmosphere of Dante's Hell. Composers like Franz Liszt were inspired by the Divine Comedy to create works that capture their emotional intensity. In its Dante Symphony, Liszt uses the orchestra to represent the horrors of hell and the hope of paradise, through moments of dissonance and chaos that evoke the storms of the convicted. The piece is both an interpretation and a musical translation of Dante's trip, allowing the listener to experience the text in a visceral and sensory way. In more recent times, Dante's Hell has echoed in cinema and video games, where his dark imagery and intricate scenarios have been adapted for new formats. Films such as C7en, 1995, although they are not direct adaptations, resonate with Dante's moral structure by presenting a narrative focused on capital sins and their consequences. In video games, titles such as Dante's Inferno, 2010, take creative licenses to reimagine hell as an interactive space, allowing players to visual and narratively explore the circles and their torments. Dante's influence also extends to modern poetry and popular culture. Poets like T.S. Eliot in Bolder Earth and contemporary artists such as Ai Weiwei, who uses hell as a political metaphor, reinterpret the Dantesque themes in current contexts. These works reflect how the concepts of hell and punishment remain powerful tools to examine tensions between morality, power, and humanity. Each artistic interpretation of Dante's Hell not only pays tribute to his work, but also recontextualizes it, highlighting aspects that resonate at different times and cultures. While some artists emphasize terror and despair, others find in their narrative a fertile terrain to reflect on redemption, justice, and meaning of life. This duality in interpretations ensures that Dante's Hell remains an endless source of fascination and a mirror of human concerns. Dante Alighieri's Hell, although originally anchored in a medieval and Christian worldview, has transcended its religious and literary context, infiltrating in cinema and modern popular culture. Over time, Hell has gone reimagined, adapted and reinterpreted, both in their visual representation and in the treatment of their issues: morality, condemnation, sin, and redemption. From the first films to contemporary video games, the modern representations of Hell have been enriched with new dimensions, merging the classic with the contemporary, the theological with the philosophical. One of the most emblematic examples in the cinema is the movie C7en, 1995, directed by David Fincher. Although it is not a direct adaptation of the Divine Comedy, the film takes key elements of Dante's Hell, particularly the idea of the 7 capital sins, as the basis for its narrative. In this work, Hell is not a physical place, but a moral process. Sins are represented in a graphic and frightful way through the murders of a serial killer who seeks to punish those who consider guilty of the same sins. In this case, Hell becomes a metaphor for divine remuneration and the suffering that transgression entails. The film Constantine, 2005, based on the Hellblazer comic, is another adaptation that takes elements of Dante's Hell and takes them to a modern and supernatural context. The protagonist, John Constantine, is an exorcist and detective who has the ability to see hell and beyond. In this version of Hell, eternal punishment is visualized as a space in which souls are trapped in endless torment cycles, a direct visual interpretation of the Dantesque descriptions, but adapted to a world of demons and supernatural powers. Hell here is not only a place of suffering, but a cosmic battlefield between good and evil, which adds a layer of complexity to traditional interpretation. Another highlighted example in the cinema is Dante's Hell, 1999, an animated film based directly on the Divine Comedy. This version adheres more faithfully to Dante's work, using a visual representation of the 9 circles of hell, with their respective punishments for each type of sin. Through this adaptation, it seeks to capture the atmosphere and the tone of the original work, using animation to create a surreal and scary world that echoes the atmosphere of Dante's Hell. Despite being a visually shocking interpretation, it is also given an adventure turn, exploring the trip of Dante and Virgil in a more accessible tone. In the field of video games, Dante's Inferno, 2010, is presented as a direct adaptation of the Divine Comedy. In this game, the players take the role of Dante, who must cross the 9 circles of hell to save the soul of his beloved Beatrice. The remarkable thing about this video game is how the Dantesque descriptions of the infernal circles used to create visually complex and challenging environments, each representing a specific sin. Hell here transforms into an interactive and visceral scenario, where the player faces the souls condemned in a fight that reinforces the consequences of sin. Each circle becomes a unique world, from the uncontrollable wind of lust to betrayal icy lake, which allows to experience hell not only as a philosophical concept, but as a scenario in which the player can interact and, somehow, live punishments. Hell also appears in more recent games such as Doom, 2016, and Doom Eternal, 2020, where it is presented as a place of chaos, destruction, and demons. In these titles, Hell becomes the fight between demonic forces and human characters, with the player taking the role of a warrior known as the Doom Slayer that must clean the hell of demonic creatures. Although this approach is more dystopic and aggressive, the essence of a dark and malignant place that needs to be purified, a contemporary interpretation of infernal horrors that remain relevant in the context of popular culture, is maintained. In addition, television series as Supernatural have resorted to the concept of hell to add depth to their stories. In Supernatural, hell is a space where the souls of the convicted are continuously tormented and where demons play a fundamental role in the administration of eternal suffering. Here, hell is not only seen as a punishment, but also as a place of torture and manipulation, a modern representation of hell that reflects psychological terror rather than the physicist. As for modern literature, authors such as Neil Gaiman in his work The Sandman have explored concepts of hell and eternal punishment symbolically. Gaiman creates hell where human beings face their own perceptions of sin and suffering, introducing a more philosophical vision of the beyond. Dantesque influence is evident, but the author uses hell as a vehicle to explore human psychology and personal decisions. Modern popular culture continues, therefore, reinterpreting Dante's Hell, taking it beyond its theological and literary framework towards a multifaceted space that reflects the complexities of the human condition. Each adaptation, either in cinema, television, video games, or literature, not only refers to Dante's original work, but also offers a reflection on punishment, morality, and destiny in the context of contemporary society. Regardless of the way it is represented, hell remains a powerful symbol of the consequences of evil, transgression, and internal struggle of human beings with their own nature. Dante Alighieri's work, especially the Divine Comedy, has left a deep mark on world literature, and Hispanic literature has not been the exception. The issues that explore sin, punishment, divine justice, and the human condition in hell have become rich sources for many Spanish-speaking authors. From the 15th and 16th centuries to the 20th century, writers and poets have found in the Dantesque work a crucial reference for their own creations. Some, such as Jorge Luis Borges, were not only inspired by Dante's hell, but they reimagined him in his own way, merging Dante's ideas with his own philosophical and literary concerns. One of the first Hispanic literary figures influenced by Dante was Garcilaso de la Vega, one of the most important poets of the Spanish Renaissance. Through his knowledge of Italian literature, Garcilaso was able to access Dante's work, whose sense of morality and redemption is reflected in Garcilaso's poems, especially in his elegies and sonnets. Although Garcilaso did not write a work that focused directly on Dante's hell, his treatment of love and death evokes Dante's influence on his vision of human suffering and the search for spiritual comfort. Later, during the Golden Age, writers such as Luis de Leon and Tirso de Molina also show echoes of the Dantesque vision. In works such as The Life Withdrawn and The Condemned by Distrustful, respectively, you can see moments of reflection on human destiny, the suffering of the soul, and divine justice, recurring issues in Dante's hell. Although they do not make a direct reference to Dante's trip, they are integrating the morality and theological vision that Dante exposed in his masterpiece. One of the most relevant authors in modern Hispanic literature influenced by Dante is Jorge Luis Borges. The Argentine writer was not only an admirer of Dante's work, but, throughout his career, he cultivated a constant literary relationship with hell. In his essay Tel Sur, Borges reflects on the importance of hell in the history of literature and the way in which Dantesque images continue to influence the construction of literary reality. Borges was particularly fascinated by the structure of the Divine Comedy and by the Dantesque conception of human destiny as something that is built from moral decisions. Borges, in his stories and essays, fuses Dante's hell with his own ideas about time, universe, and infinity. In stories such as El Aleph, you can trace traces of the Dantesque conception of destiny and justice, where condemned souls, as in the Divine Comedy, seem trapped in repetitive and endless cycles. For Borges, Dantesque hell was not only a place of physical suffering, but a mental and metaphysical state. Hell was a maze of the soul, a space for reflection that was not only linked to divine justice, but also to the eternal game of human thoughts. In his famous work Fictions, Borges uses the figure of Dante to present alternative worlds in which humans fight to understand morality and divine justice. Through stories such as The Astaion House and The Babel Library, Borges takes Dante's structures and turns them into metaphors of the human condition. Dante's hell architecture becomes a metaphor of the labyrinths of thought and knowledge, where punishment or redemption are not necessarily related to the actions of the characters, but with their own inability to leave the maze of their mind. This reinterpretation of Dante does not seek a literal representation of hell, but is asked about the relations between human consciousness, infinity, and destiny. Another writer of great importance in Hispanic literature that owes his literary influence to Dante is Octavio Paz. In his work The Labyrinth of Loneliness, Paz made echo of Dante's vision of human destiny to reflect on the condition of the individual and his relationship with society and the cosmos. Paz, like Dante, not only addresses human suffering, but also explores the deep philosophical questions about freedom, guilt, and redemption. Although Paz does not refer directly to Dante's hell, his conception of life as a constant search for identity and understanding reflects the internal struggle that Dante's souls face in hell. Dante's influence also extends to contemporary authors, such as Carlos Fuentes, who in his novel Terra Nostra explores issues of power, corruption, and moral transgression, in a world that evokes the structure of hell and its circles. Sources takes elements of the Dantesque work to create a dense and complex literary universe, in which historical figures and social realities are intertwined in a space of condemnation and moral reflection. In contemporary poetry, authors such as José Angel Buesa and Luis Cernuda have also been influenced by Dante's vision, especially in their exploration of the nature of love, suffering, and death. In many of his poems, the idea of hell and divine justice are reflected as a place of emotional and spiritual pain, where human actions have inevitable consequences, and where repentance and redemption seem to always be out of reach. Dante's influence on Hispanic literature is vast and multifaceted, and remains a cornerstone for reflection on morality, fate, and human nature. Authors such as Borges, Peace, Fuentes, and Cernuda not only took inspiration for the vision of Dantesque hell, but adapted it to their own philosophical and literary concerns, creating new ways of addressing the question of suffering and justice. However, the ideas of a beyond in which souls are punished for their sins are not exclusive to medieval Christianity or European tradition. Throughout history, many cultures and religions have conceived their own hells, each with their own characteristics, laws, and meanings. While there are obvious parallels between Dante's hell and the representations of other belief systems, marked differences that reflect the various worldviews of the societies that developed them also arise. One of the most obvious parallels is between Christian hell and the Hades of Greek mythology. In both traditions, hell is a dark and underground place, to which the souls of the dead are sent after passing through earthly life. However, while in Hades the dead simply inhabit an underworld without a great associated moral burden, in Dante's hell, punishment is a direct consequence of sins committed in life. In the Dantesque vision, each circle of hell is designed to punish a specific sin, from lust to betrayal, and the severity of punishment reflects the nature of the crime. In contrast, Hades was not necessarily linked to punishment. In Greek mythology, the dead were divided between the Tartar, a place of suffering for the great criminals, and Eliseo, a field of blessing for virtuous souls. Dante, in its structure, establishes a clear distinction between good and evil, which radically differentiates the vision of Christian hell from the most ambiguous notions of Greek mythology. Another relevant comparison is with the Hindu Yama and the Buddhist Naraka. In these religions, the punishment of souls has a purpose similar to that of Dantesque hell, which is the purification of the soul through suffering. In Hinduism, Yama is the god who governs the kingdom of the dead, a place to which souls travel to face the consequences of their actions. The Naraka, meanwhile, is a series of infernal kingdoms in which souls experience specific torments that correspond to the sins they committed in life. Although Naraka's structure is not as complex or hierarchical as Dante's hell, both share the notion that souls are punished according to the nature of their transgressions. A fascinating aspect of Naraka is that it is not necessarily eternal. Condemned souls can eventually be released after fulfilling their punishment, which contrasts with the Christian vision of eternal hell. In the Divine Comedy, the they have been in hell have no opportunity to redemption, which reflects a more rigid and finalist conception of divine justice, something closer to the idea of absolute and irreversible justice. In the Islamic religion, the concept of Jahannam, hell, presents similarities with Christian hell. As in the Divine Comedy, Islamic hell is a place of eternal torment for those who have rejected God or committed serious transgressions. Jahannam is described as a burning place of fire, with levels of punishment that vary according to sin committed. The punishment system described in the Quran is very similar to that of Dante, in the sense that souls face suffering according to the seriousness of their sins. However, in the Islamic tradition, salvation is also a central theme, and those who have followed the straight path can be forgiven by Allah's mercy, which offers an open door to hope, unlike Dante's vision, where the conviction is eternal and immutable. Jahannam also has a hierarchical structure, such as Dante's hell, with punishment levels that correspond to different sins, from the most serious, such as betrayal, to the least significant. However, in some Islamic interpretations, Jahannam has a purification component. Those who are punished can be released from hell once they have atoned for their sins, something that differs from the Dantesque vision, in which there is no way of escape or purification. In Jewish tradition, the conception of eternal punishment and hell is less prominent than in Christian and Islamic religions. However, there is the concept of Gehinnom, which is a place of temporal purification for the souls of those who have sinned. Gehinnom is not considered a place of eternal punishment, but rather a transitory space where souls experience suffering as part of their purification process before being admitted to Olam Haba, the coming world. This establishes a significant difference with the Dantesque conception, since the punishment in Gehinnom has an end, and souls can eventually be redeemed, which introduces a dimension of mercy that is not present in Dante's hell. In the indigenous traditions of America, especially in Andean worldviews, there are concepts of an underworld or dark places, such as the Uku Pasha of the Quechua peoples, which is seen as a place of renewal and death, but not necessarily associated with eternal punishments. Souls travel to this underworld and face challenges that are related to their previous life, but the idea of hell as eternal punishment does not exist. This reinforces the difference between Christian and Dantesque worldviews, where the conviction is seen as irrevocable and final, unlike the transit or purification places of other cultures. Finally, Nordic mythology presents the Hel, the underground kingdom governed by the goddess Hel, daughter of Loki. Unlike Dante's hell, hell is not a place of punishment for the souls of the dead, rather, it is a place to which those who have not died in battle go, and the condition of souls there is not associated with torments, but with a gloomy and boring existence. Although hell has a certain affinity with hell, the relationship with eternal punishment is not as marked as in the Dantesque case, which reflects a less condemnatory vision of the beyond. In summary, although Dante's hell has a great universal resonance and shares some parallels with other concepts beyond different cultures and religions, it also reflects a very particular worldview focused on Christian divine justice, rigid morality, and eternal punishment. The differences with other visions of hell, such as those found in Hinduism, Islam, Judaism, Greek and Nordic mythologies, and indigenous traditions, underline the multiplicity of ways in which societies have tried to understand human suffering, morality, and fate after death. Dante's hell, although conceived more than 700 years ago, remains a source of powerful reflection in contemporary society. The work, with its intricate structure, not only offers a terrifying vision of what awaits lost souls, but also offers deep moral lessons that resonate today. Dante not only presents an eternal punishment for sinners, but, through his trip, he invites us to confront our own behaviors, our decisions, and the impact they have on our destiny. One of the first and most obvious messages that emerge from hell is the importance of individual responsibility. Each soul in Dante's hell is there due to their own actions during his life, and there is no redemption for those who refuse to regret. Through the figure of the convicted, Dante reminds us that our elections have consequences, and those consequences can define our existence beyond death. This concept remains relevant today, when many face the dilemma between taking the easy or fair path, and the price we pay for those decisions is often not immediate, but it can be irreversible. The work also highlights the power of divine justice. In hell, the punishment suffered by souls is not a simple remuneration, but reflects the nature of their sin. Dante creates a symmetry between sin and his punishment, which leads us to reflect on the notion of justice in our own life. This principle is something that we can apply in our daily decisions, seeking to act with integrity and being aware of the long-term repercussions of our actions. In a world where justice seems to be relative, Dante's hell presents an image of a universal and perfect justice, in which souls are punished according to their transgressions unequivocally. Beyond justice, hell also tells us about the need for redemption. In the work, the eternal condemnation of souls highlights a crucial lesson, that salvation and redemption must be actively sought, and there is no time or place for spiritual procrastination. In an era where many people may feel that there is infinite time to change, Dante's hell emphasizes the urgency of making correct moral decisions and repenting while there is still an opportunity. Those convicted in hell are those who have refused to change. While in hell there is no room for redemption, its very existence underlines the need to reconcile with ourselves and others. In daily life, forgiveness is a powerful tool to free ourselves from the emotional loads that drag us. However, Dante's hell shows otherwise. The suffering of convicted souls is eternal precisely because they refuse to regret or recognize their faults. This contrast emphasizes the importance of not clinging to resentment or arrogance, but to seek internal peace and healing. In a society marked by fragmentation, selfishness, and individualism, Dante's hell also underlines the importance of solidarity and love of neighbor. Many of those convicted in hell are found there not only for their own sins, but also for the bad actions committed against others. Selfishness, violence, disdain for the suffering of others, and indifference to the pain of others are recurring themes throughout the work. By observing the punishment suffered by those who did not show compassion during their life, Dante reminds us of the need to have empathy, living in community, and recognizing that our actions deeply affect others. Hell also offers a lesson about the danger of arrogance and vanity. Many of the sinners in Dante's hell were people who, throughout their lives, did not recognize their own vulnerability or their need for grace. They clung to their pride, to their sense of superiority, believing that their actions had no repercussions. This type of mentality makes us reflect on the importance of humility in our own lives. We live in an era of fierce competition and individual success, but Dante's hell warns us about the dangers of putting our ego to the needs of the soul and morals. Finally, Dante offers us a powerful reflection on the meaning of life and death. When touring hell, the reader faces a deep vision of what it means to exist, but also what it means not really exist. The condemned souls are trapped in an eternal cycle of suffering, condemned to live in a state of insensitivity, repeating their mistakes without end. This invites us to question how our lives live and if our actions and thoughts take us to light or to a kind of emotional and psychological condemnation that deprives us of inner peace. Dante's hell is not only a place of torment, but a metaphor of personal hell that we create when we lose course and connection with what is morally correct. Dante's hell is not just a medieval story about divine punishment. Today, it is still a call for attention to the importance of morality, redemption, forgiveness, and individual responsibility. It invites us to reflect on the nature of the human soul, the impact of our actions, and the consequences of living a life away from compassion and ethics. In such a complex world and full of challenges, the lessons offered by Dante remain more than relevant, inviting us to act with integrity, empathy, and a deep sense of responsibility for ourselves and others. Dante's trip through hell, purgatory, and paradise is not just an epic adventure or a representation of the punishments and rewards of the beyond. Beyond what is perceived with the naked eye, the Divine Comedy is, above all, a deeply personal story of spiritual transformation. Dante, the protagonist and author, embarks on this trip not only as an observer but as a man who seeks to understand himself, reconcile with his own sins, and find his purpose in a world that seemed plunged into despair and confusion. Dante's trip is, first, a search for redemption. At the beginning of the work, the poet is lost in a dark jungle, a symbol of his moral and spiritual disorientation. This jungle, which could be seen as a representation of its own mistakes and lack of direction, is the starting point of its inner trip. Dante, like any human being who faces moments of crisis, is diverted from the straight path and away from the truth. You are not sure to do or how to find the exit of the darkness that surrounds it. It is at this point when Virgil, his guide, that symbolizes reason, logic, and wisdom that can lead to light. However, the trip will not be easy. The light that Dante seeks is found through suffering, reflection, and confrontation of the darkest aspects of his soul. The purpose of the trip, therefore, is purification. Through the circles of hell, Dante is a witness to suffering and divine justice. By observing the torments that sinners suffer, not only understands the magnitude of their own faults, but also faces the need to recognize human nature and universal imperfections. Each circle of hell, with its specific punishment for each sin, not only reflects divine justice, but also offers an ethical and moral lesson for Dante, and for the reader. The suffering of condemned souls allows you to understand how their own acts, thoughts, and decisions can lead to a similar destination if you do not regret and reform. This process of recognition and confrontation with sin is essential for its spiritual transformation. Dante's trip also reflects a process of self-knowledge and self-transformation. While advancing for hell, purgatory, and finally paradise, Dante experiences a deep inner evolution. His relationship with Virgil, and then with Beatrice, his beloved muse that guides him towards divine light, underlines the progress of his transformation. Virgil represents human reason, which guides it through the darkest aspects of hell and shows him the consequences of his own failures. However, Virgil cannot accompany him in purgatory or paradise. It is Beatrice, a symbol of faith and divine purity, who guides him in his rise to heavenly kingdoms. Through this transition, Dante goes from being a man trapped in his own blame to someone who finally connects with the divine. This evolution reflects the spiritual progress of a human being that, through reflection, repentance, and divine love, can achieve salvation. Dante's spiritual transformation is not just a matter of personal change, it also has a universal relevance. Through the figure of Dante, the poem treats issues that transcend time and space, the struggle between good and evil, the internal struggle of the human being, the pain of suffering, and the desire for redemption. While Dante is writing from a medieval Christian perspective, the universal issues he addresses continue to be relevant today. The idea of an inner trip, of a search to overcome the shadows that obscure our life, resonates deeply with any human being that is in front of their own existential challenges and doubts. Through his trip, Dante shows us that, regardless of our beliefs or circumstances, we are all called to question our actions, to recognize our sins, regret, and find a path to light. Dante also calls for social morality. In his work, he presents historical and contemporary figures that are not only convicted of their personal offenses, but also for their defects in terms of their relationship with society. Dante criticizes characters who abused their power, who betrayed public trust, or that allowed their personal vices to have devastating consequences for others. In this sense, Dante's trip also becomes a reflection on the social and moral responsibility of each individual in society. By embarking on this trip, Dante not only seeks his own salvation, but also to illuminate his contemporaries about the consequences of his actions, and by extension, send a message to future generations about the importance of living with integrity and ethical awareness. At a deeper level, Dante's purpose can be understood as an allegory of life itself. Through hell, purgatory, and paradise, Dante faces the stages of human life, inevitable sufferings, the process of growth and transformation, and finally the hope of a higher purpose, either in this world or in the most there. The work reminds us that suffering is not something we should avoid, but something that we can transcend if we learn from it, if we make the right decisions, and if we look for a spiritual connection with the divine. Dante's journey, therefore, is not only his own trip, but everyone's trip, a trip that reflects our internal struggle to find meaning, by reconciling with our humanity and, finally, for reaching peace. Ultimately, the purpose of Dante's trip, both in a personal and universal sense, is that of the transformation and the search for the superior purpose. Throughout the Divine Comedy, Dante faces his pain, his mistakes, and his limitations, but in the end he finds salvation not only for him, but also for humanity as a whole. Dante's trip reminds us that, no matter how dark and hopeless that our moments of crisis may seem, there is always a light at the end of the tunnel, a possibility of redemption and change. Hell, purgatory, and paradise are more than places, they are states of the soul, and when navigating them, Dante invites us to consider how we can also transcend our own limitations and find peace in the midst of chaos. In the vast and meticulously structured narrative of the Divine Comedy, hell, purgatory, and paradise are not isolated entities, but parts of an interconnected whole that reflects the medieval vision of the cosmos and the human soul. These three kingdoms, although different in their essence, are intrinsically linked, not only by Dante's journey, but for the spiritual and moral purpose that each one represents. Understanding how hell connects to purgatory and paradise is key to understanding the unifying message of the work. Redemption and transcendence are possible, but only after confronting sin and suffering. Hell, like the first kingdom that Dante visits, represents the lowest point of human existence, both physically and spiritually. It is a definitive condemnation, where souls have lost all hope of salvation. Each circle, with its specific punishments, is a mirror of the earthly elections of the souls that inhabit it. Here, Dante not only meets eternal suffering, but also understands the severity of sin and its impact on the divine order. However, hell is not the end of the trip, but a necessary prelude to what comes next. When facing absolute darkness, Dante begins to understand the need for light and divine grace, which prepares him for superior kingdoms. Purgatory, on the other hand, is a kingdom of transition and hope. Unlike hell, where souls are caught eternally in their sin, purgatory is a place of purification, where souls actively seek to atone for their faults to approach God. The connection between hell and purgatory is evident in the fact that both kingdoms are places of suffering, but for diametrically opposite purposes. While suffering in hell is static and punitive, in purgatory it is dynamic and transformative. The souls of purgatory are aware of their sins, but also of the possibility of redeeming. This contrast underlines the importance of repentance and free will. While the condemned souls of hell chose to remain on their wrong paths, the souls of purgatory have chosen to seek reconciliation with God. Paradise, finally, is the ultimate destination, the state of perfection and union with the divine. The connection between hell and paradise is more symbolic than literal, but equally powerful. In Dante's narrative, paradise would not be understandable or attainable without the contrast of hell. When touring the darkest depths of existence, Dante acquires a deeper appreciation of heavenly light. Hell, showing the devastating impact of sin, serves as a reminder of what is at stake, the loss of connection with God and eternal happiness. Therefore, hell is not only a condemnation place, but also a warning about the importance of choosing the right path, a path that finally leads to paradise. In addition to the moral and spiritual progression that these kingdoms represent, there is also a structural connection that unifies Dante's cosmos. Hell, as described in the work, is a great cavity formed by the fall of Lucifer from the heavens. In the center of the earth, where Lucifer is trapped, the door is found to the purgatory, which rises as a mountain in the opposite hemisphere. This physical connection symbolizes the transition from the lowest point of the human soul towards the possibility of ascending to divine perfection. It is a reminder that, even after falling into sin, there is an opportunity to get up and seek salvation. Dante's journey through these three kingdoms also reflects the spiritual trajectory of the human soul according to medieval Christian theology. First, the soul must face the reality of sin and the consequences of evil, hell. Then, it must go through a process of repentance and purification, purgatory, before finally reaching union with the divine in a perfect state of grace, paradise. This progression underlines the idea that the path to salvation is not linear or easy, but a complex process that requires facing both shadows and light. Another important aspect of the connection between these kingdoms is Dante's figure. His personal journey through hell, purgatory, and paradise is not only a physical, but also spiritual trip. When facing the horror of hell, Dante is not only an observer, he is also a participant who must reflect on his own life and his own sins. This experience prepares it for purgatory, where it begins to understand the importance of repentance and transformation. Finally, in paradise, Dante reaches a level of understanding and communion with the divine that would have been impossible without having gone through the previous kingdoms. Its evolution as a character is the conductive thread that unifies the three kingdoms and gives meaning to its connection. Ultimately, hell, purgatory, and paradise form a complete cycle that reflects the human struggle to find meaning, redemption, and transcendence. Hell, although gloomy and scary, is an essential part of this cycle, because it is the starting point for spiritual transformation. Without the recognition of sin and its consequences, it would not be possible to seek purification or achieve divine glory. Thus, hell is not only a place of punishment, but also a powerful reminder of human ability to choose their own destiny and the possibility of finding redemption through faith, reflection, and spiritual effort. The figure of Dante Alighieri, and particularly his masterpiece The Divine Comedy, have risen as imperishable symbols of literature, philosophy, and human thought. More than 7 centuries of its creation, this epic poem continues to resonate with readers of all cultures and times, leaving a legacy that transcends borders and disciplines. His endurance not only lies in his poetic beauty and his monumental structure, but also in the depth of his themes, the universality of his reflections, and his ability to connect with the most fundamental questions of the human being. Dante created the Divine Comedy as a mirror of his time and the human condition. In an era of political, religious, and personal conflicts, Dante poured into his work his experience of exile, his reflections on corrupt power, his love for Beatrice, and his devotion to God. The result was a poem that not only tells a physical and spiritual journey through hell, purgatory, and paradise, but also offers a vision of cosmos, morality, and humanity itself. Each verse is loaded with symbolism and meaning, which allows multiple interpretations and guarantees its relevance for different audiences and historical contexts. One of the most amazing aspects of Dante's legacy is his ability to capture the complexity of the human soul. Through his meetings with souls in the hereafter, Dante explores the passions, sins, virtues, and aspirations that define our existence. The characters that Dante finds, from the tragic Paolo and Francesca in hell to the repentant souls of purgatory and the glorified saints of paradise, are deeply human. Their stories and emotions, although anchored in a medieval theological framework, are as recognizable today as they were in the 14th century. In this sense, Dante not only speaks of his time, but of all time. The structure of the Divine Comedy also contributes to its immortality. The poem is composed of 3 songs, each divided into 33 songs, with an introductory song that completes a total of 100. This mathematical and symbolic design reflects divine perfection, while offering a rich and balanced literary experience. The precision with which Dante organizes his literary universe creates a sense of order and purpose that contrasts with the chaos of the earthly world that he describes. This symmetry not only delights lovers of literature, but also reinforces the spiritual message of the work. The universe has a purpose and an order, although sometimes it seems inaccessible to mortals. Dante's language is another pillar of his legacy. When writing in Italian, specifically in the Tuscan dialect, Dante raised a vernacular language at the level of high literature, challenging Latin hegemony in academic and religious writing. This revolutionary act marked a turning point in the history of European literature, establishing a model for future writers who sought to express the complexities of the soul and society in their native languages. Dante's work, therefore, is not only a literary jewel, but also a milestone in the evolution of language and culture. In addition to its literary impact, the Divine Comedy is a deeply philosophical and theological work. In its pages, Dante addresses issues about free will, divine justice, the nature of sin, and the possibility of redemption. Inspired by thinkers such as Aristotle, Tomás de Aquino, and San Augustine, Dante builds a universe where morality and reason are intertwined with faith and spirituality. These reflections were not only relevant in their time, but continue to inspire debates in philosophy, ethics, and theology. Dante's work invites us to confront our own beliefs and reflect on our place in the cosmos. Dante's legacy is also manifested in the impact he has had on the arts and culture. From the frescoes of the Renaissance to contemporary interpretations in cinema, literature, and music, the Divine Comedy has been an inexhaustible source of inspiration. Artists such as Sandro Botticelli, Gustave Doré, and Salvador Dali have reflected the visions of hell, purgatory, and paradise in their works, while writers like Jorge Luis Borges have found in Dante a crucial influence for their own exploration of infinity and eternity. Even in popular culture, Dante's work is still alive, from references in video games and films to modern adaptations that reimagine his spiritual journey. The universal character of the Divine Comedy is also reflected in its ability to transcend cultural and religious differences. Although deeply rooted in the Christian tradition, Dante's work addresses issues that resonate with people of various beliefs and origins. His exploration of the internal struggle between good and evil, the desire for transcendence, and the search for purpose are universal concerns that connect readers with human experience as a whole. But perhaps the most shocking thing about Dante's legacy is his ability to talk about our own humanity. Through his trip, Dante shows us our strengths and weaknesses, our hopes and fears, our victories and failures. It reminds us that, although we all face moments of darkness and loss, we also have the ability to seek light, find redemption, and aspire to something bigger than ourselves. In this sense, the Divine Comedy is not only a literary work, but a spiritual map, a reminder that the struggle for meaning and truth is an essential part of human experience. Dante Alighieri's legacy, then, is not only that of a great poet or a deep thinker, but that of a man who knew how to capture in words the infinite mystery of life and soul. Dante's Hell, with its precise architecture and its vast catalogue of sins and punishments, is not simply a landscape of divine condemnation, but a mirror that forces us to face our own weaknesses, elections, and ethical struggles. Each circle, each torment, and every condemned soul represent aspects of human nature that, although disguised by the veil of fiction and symbolism, are deeply recognizable in our daily lives. Lust is not just an uncontrolled desire, it is the inability to prioritize true love over ephemeral passions. Gula transcends food, covering any excess that consumes our life. Greed is not only material accumulation, but an obsession that dehumanizes us and takes us away from others. Dante does not describe these foul from distance. On the contrary, his hell is visceral and close, built with a language that appeals to the senses and emotions. When reading about the souls they suffer, we not only understand their sins, but also feel their despair. This emotional connection causes hell to stop being a distant place to become an immediate and painful reflection of our own elections. How many times have we been dominated by anger, blinded by envy, or dragged by pride? Dante faces us with these questions directly and without concessions. Beyond individual sins, Dante's hell also acts as a mirror of social and political structures that perpetuate suffering and injustice. Traitors, discord, and corrupt Sowers occupy a special place in their hierarchy of condemnation, reminding us that evil not only manifests itself in our personal actions, but also in the systems we build. The corrupt leaders and manipulators that Dante finds in the deepest circles of hell remind us that politics and power are not immune to ethics. This aspect is as relevant today as it was in Dante's Florence, a reminder that collective decisions also have eternal consequences. Hell not only reflects our sins, but also our internal struggles. Each condemned soul represents someone who succumbed to their darkest side, someone who chose the easy path of selfishness about sacrifice and virtue. But Dante, as an observer and traveler, shows us that these elections are not inevitable. His own trip through hell is an act of introspection, a reminder that facing our defects is the first step towards redemption. In this sense, hell is not only a condemnation place, but also a space of ethical confrontation, a mirror that shows us who we are and who we could be. This reflection becomes even more powerful when we consider the nature of the punishments that Dante describes. Each torment is designed to be a symbolic extension of sin that caused it. Hypocrites, loaded with lead layers, physically feel the weight of their falsehood. Traitors, frozen in ice, are trapped in the coldness of their disloyalty. These punishments are not mere acts of divine revenge, they are a materialization of the natural consequences of our actions. In Dante's hell, it is not God who imposes suffering, but sin itself. This concept reinforces the idea that our ethical struggles are not only a matter of abstract morals, but that they have tangible repercussions on our life and that of others. The most disturbing of hell as a mirror of humanity is its insistence on the choice. Each soul that Dante finds is there for his own decisions. This may seem cruel, but it is also a reminder of our free will and our ability to change. Although hell is full of convicted, it is also a constant reminder of what we could avoid if we chose virtue over vice. This emphasis on choice makes Dante's hell not only a place of despair, but also a call to personal responsibility. However, this mirror offered by Dante is not one that only reflects our faults. It also shows us our ability to face them. When facing the horrors of hell, Dante does not succumb, learn. Each encounter, however terrible, prepares it for the upper kingdoms of purgatory and paradise. In this sense, hell is not only a condemnation place, but also a starting point for redemption. Looking at us at the ESP Ego Q numbers afris Dante, no solo vimos nuestras luchas éticas, sino también nuestra capacidad de superarlas. Dante's hell remains relevant because, like the most sincere mirrors, it shows us as much as we are as what we can become. Numbers recuerda nuestras luchas, pero también nuestra capacidad de elección, transformation y trascendencia. And when facing this image, Dante invites us not only to recognize our faults, but to look for the way to light, even from the deepest shadows. The legacy of the Divine Comedy and, in particular, Dante's Hell, remains an inexhaustible source of inspiration for writers, artists, and creators in various disciplines. When observing its influence so far, it is inevitable to ask how this immortal work will continue to leave a mark on future generations. El Inferno, con su rica estructura simbólica y su narrativa profundamente humana, ofrece un terreno fértil para reinterpretaciones modernas. In an increasingly globalized and digitized world, Dante's metaphors have the potential to be translated into new formats and contexts, such as virtual reality, immersive video games, and interactive cinema. The ability to create multisensory experiences based on hell circles could provide future audiences with a totally innovative way to connect with the work. In addition, the central themes of hell, sin, justice, repentance, and redemption will continue to resonate because they address eternal questions about the human condition. Los conflictos éticos, las luchas internas y la búsqueda de sentido son elementos que no caducan con el tiempo. Writers and artists of the future could reinterpret these concepts through new cultural, technological, or social perspectives, using hell as a framework to explore contemporary problems such as climate change, social inequalities, or existential crises caused by artificial intelligence. Por otro lado, es probable que el infierno de Dante siga siendo un referente académico y filosófico. Its theological interpretations and its precision in the construction of a universal ethical system could be a starting point for discussions on morality in a post-religious world or in crisis of faith. The universality of Dante's message makes it an adaptable work, capable of dialogue with a wide range of disciplines, from theology to psychology and political sciences. En quanto a las generaciones futuras de escritores, es posible que encuentren en Dante un modelo de valencia literaria. His ability to merge the personal and the political, the poetic and the philosophical, inspires to create works that not only entertain, but also challenge and transform the reader. Even in cultures far from Christianity, Dante's hell could be reinterpreted through cultural lenses that translate their message to more accessible or relevant codes for other traditions. El art visual y la música tampoco quedaron al margen. Hell circles and their punishments could continue to inspire works that explore the duality between suffering and beauty, between conviction and hope. With the advancement of technology, such as generative art and artificial intelligence, hell could take unexpected and provocative ways, continuously reinventing himself for the sensibilities of each era. En última instancia, el Inferno de Dante no es solo un mapa del castigo eterno, it is a reflection of humanity in its darkest and brighter aspects. That universal truth ensures that, regardless of the environment, culture, or time, this work will continue to influence, questioning and captivating future generations. Dante's hell is not a final destination, but an endless trip. A trip that does not end when closing the pages of the Divine Comedy, but also extends in the mind and soul of those who dare to travel their circles, to listen to the voices of the convicted and to face their own reflexes in this disturbing mirror of the human condition. Dante gives us a map not only from sin and punishment, but also of struggle, election and, ultimately, of hope. By crossing this symbolic universe, we cannot avoid questioning our own actions, our weaknesses and our strengths. Each step of Dante in his descent is an invitation to look inside ourselves, to identify the shadows we carry and consider if we are willing to leave them behind. In this sense, hell is not a distant or alien place, it is a space within all of us, a reminder that, although evil can be seductive, there is always the possibility of seeking redemption. Dante numbers deja, al final de su descenso, con un horizonte abierto. The exit of hell and the rise to purgatory and paradise is a reminder that the road to light is always possible, even from the darkest depths. And yet that light is not guaranteed, it requires courage, sacrifice and the ability to confront our most intimate failures. This endless trip is not just that of Dante, it is that of each of us. It is the journey of humanity as a whole, constantly fighting between good and evil, between hope and despair, between selfishness and compassion. Dante shows us that, although hell is a condemnation place, it is also a learning space, a reminder that even in the darkest moments, there are lessons that can guide us towards a greater purpose. In the end, the Divine Comedy does not give us definitive answers, but questions that will resonate in us long after having finished reading it. What does it mean to live with justice? How do we face our own contradictions? Can we find redemption, not only in the divine, but also in our relationships with others and with ourselves? The trip that Dante began more than 7 centuries ago is not over. He continues every time someone opens its pages and meets their powerful and transformative vision. His hell, with all his horror and beauty, remains a reminder that, although we can descend to the depths, we can also find the way to height. That is Dante's final message, that the journey of humanity has no end, but always has direction.